Hello, boa tarde. Que bom ver todo mundo aqui. Sejam muito bem-vindas, bem-vindos e bem-vindes. A comissão organizadora, né, aqui do DELA, me deu a honra de abrir esse evento, né, numa data que a gente escolheu a dedo para comemorar o que seria o aniversário de 100 anos de Freire ontem. Então, eu quero começar com o nosso muitíssimo obrigada a esse educador tão fundamental para nós, né, e cuja vida e obra se fazem, assim, imensamente, particularmente relevantes nesses tempos que a gente está vivendo. Então, eu vou começar com a minha audiodescrição. O meu nome é Clarissa Menezes Jordão, eu sou uma mulher de pele branca, cabelos cacheados, grisalhos e curtinhos. Tenho os olhos castanhos, eu uso óculos de armação grande e escura, tenho o nariz um pouco grande e os lábios pequenos. Eu estou usando hoje uma blusa vermelho escuro, com umas flores coloridas, mas não muito, brincos pequenos também, vermelhos, um colarzinho com uma pimentinha vermelha, que é para espantar um mal-olhado. E atrás de mim, à minha direita, tem um armário de embuia, né, de madeira embuia meio amarelada, tendendo um pouquinho mais para o escuro. À esquerda tem um gaveteiro, né, da mesma madeira do armário. Como é que eu faço para vocês verem aqui? E em cima desse gaveteiro tem um abajur, e acima do abajur, numa parede lilás, tem uma prateleira com livros, uns bichinhos de pelúcia e uma máscara preta, né, de máscara daquelas de ir para manifestação, e nela está escrito "Fora Bolsonaro" em letras brancas. Eu não podia deixar, gente, de descrever essa máscara. E falando nisso, eu quero lembrar os 4 milhões e meio, mais de 4 milhões e meio de mortos por Covid no planeta, desde o início da pandemia, e especialmente os quase 600 mil mortos por Covid no Brasil. Eu li esse final de semana um estudo da Oxfam Brasil, que diz que cerca de 120 mil mortes só no primeiro ano da pandemia podiam ter sido evitadas se o Brasil tivesse adotado nacionalmente medidas preventivas como distanciamento físico e restrições a aglomerações, né? Então, eu tenho que manifestar, né, essa indignação diante dessas mortes que poderiam ter sido evitadas. Bom, vamos lá, né? Então, o DELA, eu vou falar um pouquinho sobre o DELA antes que a gente comece realmente o evento, né, para vocês entenderem um pouco melhor o que a gente está planejando para essa semana e para outra semana em outubro. Então, o DELA é uma iniciativa dos grupos de pesquisa GPLIM e Identidade e Leitura, né, os dois são grupos aqui da UFPR. Nós contamos com a colaboração preciosa da UFPR, da nossa instituição, através do programa de pós-graduação em Letras e da Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa e Pós-Graduação, a quem a gente agradece imensamente. Nós agradecemos também ao público, né, que recebeu e está recebendo com entusiasmo a nossa proposta, e, sobretudo, agradecemos às pessoas, né, nossas convidadas aqui do DELA, que prontamente aceitaram participar e têm colaborado conosco imensamente também em todos os sentidos, né? Com paciência para ler os nossos e-mails e tudo mais. Então, agradecemos muito também aos nossos e nossas convidadas. Agradecemos também, claro, né, ao Núcleo de Assessoria Pedagógica da Universidade, o NAP, às pessoas intérpretes de Libras que estarão aqui conosco, e, claro, também a nossa consultora sobre direitos autorais, a Silvana Carbonera. E certamente, e não em último lugar, eu, pessoalmente, queria agradecer a comissão organizadora do DELA 2021, né? Pessoal, acho que venham aqui para a tela para a gente dar um oi para o pessoal, por favor. Vão se chegando. Aí o pessoal vai chegando, vão entrando. Aí, agora sim. Acho que está todo mundo aí, né? Então, somos nós aqui, a comissão organizadora. A gente vai estar com várias atribuições, né, no backstage. Então, eu quero agradecer muito a vocês, meus queridos colegas e queridas colegas, por toda essa ajuda que vocês têm feito e vão continuar fazendo, né, certamente. Então, obrigada, gente. Podem voltar lá para suas funções backstage. Muito obrigada. Essa é só uma apresentação rápida. A gente tem um monte de atribuições, né, backstage, e aí a gente vai se revezando, né, conforme o evento for acontecendo, a gente vai se revezando aqui na condução das atividades, e aí vocês vão ter chance de conversar com a gente, ou conhecer, enfim, ver todo mundo da comissão durante o evento. Bom, a participação de todas essas pessoas da comissão e das pessoas convidadas é uma participação voluntária, né? Nós tivemos, de auxílio financeiro para o evento, nós só tivemos uma bolsa de graduação para um dos membros da comissão, que já está trabalhando conosco há quase 2 meses, e nós tivemos também o pagamento da licença temporária de uso do StreamYard pela Pró-Reitoria de Pós-Graduação, a quem a gente agradece também novamente. Ninguém aqui está recebendo Prolabore, né? A gente está fazendo o DELA porque a gente acredita, né, na importância de se debater colonialidade, de se pensar decolonialidade dentro da linguística aplicada, né? Acho que isso se torna mais importante ainda, pelo menos para mim, nesses tempos, né, que a gente está vivendo agora, nesses tempos, assim, para usar um eufemismo, eu vou chamar de nebulosos, né, em que as implicações das linguagens na vida das pessoas, né, que é o foco, como a gente percebe, o foco da linguística aplicada que a gente faz, essas implicações acabam tomando tons vários, né, e assumindo uma super relevância para a gente se situar diante do mundo contemporâneo, né, com essas fake news que aparecem por aí, distribuídas em ritmo acelerado, a desinformação que corre solta por aí também, a retórica política, as tentativas de cerceamento de comunicação, né, de censura, os golpes, macro e micro golpes que andam acontecendo por aí, as discussões em torno das interpretações das leis, do mundo, da cultura, da história, enfim, né. Em tempos, acho que estamos vivendo tempos também de negacionismo, de revisionismo, globalismo, esses ismos todos aí. A gente quer, com o DELA, como a gente escreveu lá no site, né, do evento, a gente quer problematizar perspectivas, eu estou lendo lá do site, tá, um trechinho que eu colei aqui. A gente quer problematizar perspectivas decoloniais de dentro da linguística aplicada, olhando para as relações possíveis e impossíveis entre o pensamento decolonial e práticas de linguagem, né? A partir do pressuposto de que essas práticas de linguagem nos constituem, né? E aí, ao debater essas relações possíveis e impossíveis, acho que a gente vai, né, esperançando sempre, como o Freire nos pediu. Então, a gente quer agradecer a todas as pessoas, né, que estão aqui, que vão estar conosco nessa semana e depois em outubro também, dispostas a discutir, né, essas questões e lutar por um mundo um mundo de preferência melhor, né, mas que pelo menos seja um mundo que sobreviva com algum nível de saúde aos desmandos da humanidade que existe aqui nesse planeta, né? Bom, sem mais enrolação, sem mais delongas, eu quero explicar para vocês brevemente como é que vai ser a estrutura do evento, né? E aí vocês vão, claro, né, a partir dessa apresentação rápida, vocês podem depois consultar o site do evento, onde vocês vão ter um detalhamento maior, né? O Marcos vai projetar de vez em quando aqui para a gente, na tela, o endereço, né, o e-mail, para quaisquer esclarecimentos. Enquanto isso, eu vou compartilhar com vocês os slides que a gente preparou para falar um pouquinho sobre aí, ó. Obrigada, Marcos. Ele já colocou ali a descrição, né, o endereço do site. Então, gente, é assim, ó. Acho que tá. Deixa eu só tirar essa barrinha que fica embaixo aqui. Pronto. Então, é assim, ó. O DELA vai acontecer. Deixa eu trocar assim, ó. Só para eu aparecer, já que eu pus maquiagem, uma roupa bonitinha, tomei banho, eu vou aparecer um pouquinho maior aqui. Só um pouquinho, depois eu troco. Então, o DELA vai acontecer em 2 ciclos. O primeiro ciclo começa hoje, né, dia 20 de setembro, e vai até sexta-feira dessa semana, todas as tardes, das 14 às 17. Só hoje que a gente vai terminar um pouquinho depois das 17, por causa dessa introdução que a gente está fazendo para apresentar o evento, né? As falas todas vão ser disponibilizadas na íntegra, quer dizer, não na íntegra, elas vão ser, eu já explico, elas vão ser disponibilizadas no canal do YouTube do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Letras da UFPR, que é esse canal onde vocês estão assistindo, né, agora. Infelizmente, a gente não conseguiu intérpretes para as apresentações que vão acontecer em inglês nem em espanhol, mas a gente vai tentar depois disponibilizar legendas, né, para as gravações, se a gente conseguir. Cada convidado e cada convidada escolheu a língua em que vai falar, né? Nós vamos ter a maioria das falas em português, algumas em inglês, e de vez em quando em português e em inglês, né? Meio translinguajadas com o espanhol. Então, vai ser um pouco de cada, né? Os certificados de presença vão ser emitidos depois do evento. Mas você está perguntando assim, mas eu não me inscrevi com antecedência. Não faz mal, né? Não se preocupe. Quem não se inscreveu ainda e está acompanhando o evento agora, vai poder se inscrever durante a transmissão do evento, porque a gente vai também colocar no chat os links, né, o link para o formulário de frequência. Então, quando vocês preenchem o formulário de frequência, vocês ficam automaticamente inscritos no evento. Tá? Então, só tem o seguinte, precisa lembrar que como o evento está dividido em 2 ciclos de 15 horas, cada ciclo, um ciclo agora e outro em outubro, as pessoas inscritas devem ter pelo menos 75% de frequência em cada ciclo. Vamos lá. Isso é mais ou menos equivalente à participação como ouvinte em 4 dos 5 dias. Sim, João, vai ser contabilizada a presença. A gente vai projetar aqui, vai mandar no chat o link para o formulário, tá? Então, vocês precisam ter 75% já está passando aqui e vai aparecer aí no chat também para vocês. Então, é assim, a cada semana, a cada bloco de uma semana, vocês têm que ter pelo menos 75% de frequência, ou seja, vocês só podem faltar, só podem não assinar a lista um dia, né? E se eu faltar 2 dias, recebo o certificado com uma quantidade menor de horas? Não. Pelas normas da universidade, vocês só vão receber um certificado de 15 horas para cada ciclo, desde que tenham pelo menos 75% de presença nesse ciclo. Mais dúvidas? Vão perguntando aí, e a gente vai tentando responder, ou acessem o site e nos mandem e-mail, tá? Deixa eu passar agora para uma descrição do encontro, que isso é importante também para vocês se situarem um pouco melhor. Todos os dias nós vamos seguir mais ou menos a mesma rotina. Então, inicialmente, então hoje nós vamos ter a apresentação de pesquisa da Juliana, que vai ser debatida pelo professor Mignolo. Aí, a gente vai ter um intervalo curtinho, né? Aquela pausa estratégica que a gente precisa ter no meio da tarde, e aí a gente vai voltar, acho que vai ser entre 10 e 15 minutos, e aí a gente volta com a fala da pessoa convidada externa, hoje o professor Mignolo. Então, essa fala também será uma fala de 1 hora, e vai ser seguida por um debate que vai ser iniciado por quem apresentou a pesquisa no começo da tarde, hoje, a Juliana. Então, esse debate vai ser só iniciado pela Juliana, né? Nós contamos com a participação intensa de vocês aí no chat do YouTube, né? Nós queremos ir dialogando com vocês conforme vocês forem comentando no chat, então, por favor, falem aí no chat o quanto vocês quiserem, né? A gente quer ver esses teclados aí a todo vapor, né? Então, please comment freely and ask as many questions as you like or can, tá? Então, aqui eu trouxe para vocês, agora deixa eu mudar que fica melhor assim, né? Eu trouxe para vocês aqui, então, o resumão, né, da programação desta semana, que vocês já sabem, já viram no site, já viram na divulgação no Instagram e no Facebook, mas aqui está o calendário só para refrescar, né, a memória de vocês. Esse é o calendário para o ciclo 2, né, que vai ser lá em outubro. Os resumos de todas as falas e os títulos estão lá no site, né, no DELA.ufpr.br, então consultem lá, por favor. Ok, então, um aviso, né? Todos os dias nós vamos fazer a apresentação das pessoas convidadas num formato que pode ser diferente do formato de costume, né? Nós, então, sugerimos a essas pessoas que, se elas quisessem, né, aos nossos convidados e às nossas convidadas, que se elas quisessem, elas poderiam nos mandar um texto de apresentação num formato alternativo, né? Diferente da biodata do Lattes, por exemplo, né? Podia ser uma música, uma imagem, um poema. E aí, ao invés da tradicional leitura do resumo do currículo acadêmico das pessoas convidadas, a gente poderia também fazer as apresentações de uma forma um pouco mais multimodal. Então, algumas pessoas preferiram esse formato, né? Que a gente está chamando aqui entre nós de formato multimodal de apresentação, e outras preferiram a leitura do CV, né, do currículo. Então, nós vamos fazer as apresentações conforme cada pessoa convidada escolheu, né. Aí tem uma questão que é sobre direitos autorais, que é a seguinte: essa parte das atividades do dia vai ter que ser apagada das gravações, porque a gente vai usar músicas que podem não ter licença, imagens, fotos, né? Então, a gente preparou esse slide aqui para lembrar vocês de que essa parte não pode ser gravada, né? A gente vai, ao disponibilizar a gravação no YouTube daqui para diante, não é da fala inteira, tá? É só desse pedacinho da apresentação dos convidados. Então, essa parte vai ser exclusiva, vai ser um privilégio exclusivo para quem está nos assistindo ao vivo. Quem vier assistir depois não vai poder assistir, para a gente não disponibilizar essa parte, tá? Acho que fica claro, espero, né, que fique claro. Então, acho que podemos continuar, né? Então, é assim, ó, a gente convida vocês a imaginarem, né, fazer de conta que a gente está num mesmo espaço físico, todos nós, as 500 pessoas inscritas, a comissão e as pessoas convidadas de hoje. Então, vamos fazer de conta que a gente está nesse mesmo espaço, no mesmo auditório, que a gente já se cumprimentou, já se abraçou, como faz muito tempo que a gente não consegue fazer, né? Então, é nesse auditório que a gente vai apresentar para vocês, as pessoas nossas convidadas, todos os dias. E essa apresentação, então, só faz sentido quando ela é tomada assim, né? No aqui, no agora, relacionada a um contexto mais geral do evento. Não faz sentido se ela for reproduzida depois. Então, não só por causa dos direitos autorais, mas também por causa desse caráter emergente, né, das apresentações, é que a gente faz esse lembrete aqui no slide, que vai passar num Flickr aí embaixo de vez em quando, né, para lembrar que isso não vai ser disponibilizado depois. Então, nessa parte inicial, né, a gente vai ler, às vezes, um texto, às vezes a gente vai passar um vídeo, etc., né? Como eu já falei para vocês, depende de como os convidados nos mandaram e as convidadas nos mandaram as suas apresentações. Então, um dos propósitos, né, dessa parte é, de uma certa maneira, tensionar a distância entre o ser e o fazer, né? Entre os nossos perfis acadêmicos e o trem que está passando ali fora, e como nós nos vemos nas nossas vidas pessoais, né? Então, parte da minha vida pessoal já está aqui com o trem que me acompanha diuturnamente. Então, vamos lá. Hoje nós temos, vocês já sabem quem são, né? A nossa convidada e o nosso convidado de hoje. E aí, nós temos umas fotos, né, que a Juliana nos mandou, com um texto explicativo para cada foto, que eu tomei a liberdade de narrar e musicar, eu mesma. E depois, temos também o mini CV, né, do professor Mignolo. Então, eu vou fazer primeiro a leitura do mini CV, né, do professor, que já está aqui nos slides, né, engatilhado. E aí, na sequência, então, eu trago a apresentação da Juliana. Esse texto, deixa eu passar o slide aqui, né? Esse texto, então, é um texto que a gente tirou lá do site do oficial do professor, né? Na Universidade de Duke. Então, eu vou ler o texto e vocês podem acompanhar a leitura aí como apresentação. Claro, né, eu vou dizer o que todo mundo acaba dizendo, mas não deixa de ser verdadeiro por causa disso. O professor Mignolo dispensa apresentações, mas mesmo assim a gente vai apresentar, né? Então, lá no site dele, da Universidade de Duke, está escrito assim: Mignolo's research and teaching have been devoted in the past 30 years to understanding and unraveling the historical foundation of the modern colonial world system and imaginary since the 1500s. In his research, modern colonial world system and imaginary is tantamount with the historical foundation of Western civilization and its expansion around the globe. His research stands on 4 basic premises. A, that there is no world system before the 1500s, and the integration of America in the Western, Christian, European imaginary. B, that the world system generated the idea of newness, the new world, and of modernity. And C, that there is no modernity without coloniality. Coloniality is constitutive, not derivative of modernity. D, the modern colonial imaginary was mounted and maintained on the invention of the human and humanity that provided the point of reference for the invention of racism and sexism together with the invention of nature. Briefly stated, Mignolo's research has been and continues to be devoted to exposing modernity coloniality as a machine that generates and maintains injustices, and to exploring decolonial ways of delinking from the modernity coloniality. Because the political dimension of his work, in the past 15 years, Mignolo's energy has been increasingly devoted to the public sphere, working with artists, curators, and with journalists, writing op-eds and giving frequent interviews in English and Spanish, co-organizing and co-teaching summer schools in Middelburg, Bremen, and at UNC Duke. He's also frequently delivering workshops for faculty and graduate students in South and Central America, Asia, and Europe. So, muchas gracias, Professor Mignolo, for being here with us. It will be a pleasure, I'm sure. And now let's move on to Juliana's introduction. Então, a Juliana mandou as fotos e eu me responsabilizo. Deixa eu pôr aqui. A Juliana mandou as fotos e eu me responsabilizo pela edição final do vídeo. Vamos ver se vai dar certo. Vai lá, vamos.
Juliana Zégio Martinez é professora no curso de Letras na Universidade Federal do Paraná, em Curitiba, no estado do Paraná, no sul do Brasil. Boa parte de sua formação acadêmica foi realizada na mesma instituição. Juliana é licenciada em Letras e mestre em Estudos Linguísticos pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Letras da UFPR. No mestrado, foi orientada pela professora Clarissa Menezes Jordão. Seu doutorado foi realizado no Programa de Pós-Graduação em Estudos Linguísticos e Literários em Inglês pela Universidade de São Paulo, onde foi orientada pelo professor Linmário Trindade Menezes de Souza e teve a oportunidade de conhecer pesquisadoras e pesquisadores de todo o Brasil. Sua experiência profissional abrange o ensino fundamental, médio e superior, em escolas e universidades particulares e públicas, bem como em institutos de idiomas. Desde criança, sempre disse que queria ser professora e, desde os seus 17 anos, trabalha como professora. É professora do Departamento de Letras Estrangeiras Modernas. No curso de graduação em Letras, atua nas áreas de língua inglesa, formação de professores e professoras, linguística aplicada, políticas linguísticas e educacionais e cultura e ensino. Na pós-graduação, atua na linha de pesquisa Linguagens, Culturas e Identidades, Ensino e Aprendizagem. Em projetos de extensão universitária, atua na formação inicial e continuada de professores e professoras de línguas no Núcleo de Assessoria Pedagógica da UFPR, UNAP, especialmente em colaboração com professores e professoras de inglês da rede pública de educação básica, estadual e municipal. Participa de redes e de grupos de estudo e pesquisa. Alguns deles são Identidade e Leitura na UFPR, coordenado pelos professores Clarissa Jordão e Eduardo Diniz de Figueiredo, Projeto Nacional de Letramentos, Linguagem, Cultura, Educação e Tecnologia, na USP, coordenado pelos professores Valquíria Montemor e Linmário Menezes de Souza, Grupo de Estudos sobre Educação Linguística em Línguas Estrangeiras, na USP, coordenado pelo professor Daniel de Mello Ferraz. Academic Think Tank, Multilingualism, Linguistic Citizenship and Vulnerability, a Comparative Focus on South Africa and Brazil, coordenado pelos professores Quentin Williams, Christopher Stroud e Linmário Menezes de Souza. Seus interesses de pesquisa voltam-se para a formação inicial e continuada de professores e professoras de línguas, formação intercultural e internacional de professores e professoras, educação linguística, letramento crítico, internacionalização da educação, a expansão do inglês em contextos acadêmicos, o programa latino-americano Modernidade e Colonialidade e os estudos decoloniais.
Pronto. Então, assumindo a responsabilidade pela musicalização e narração da apresentação da Ju, vamos começar com a apresentação de pesquisa. So, Juliana, can I bring you to the screen? And the floor is yours, Juliana. Thank you very much for being with us.
Olá, boa tarde. Obrigada, Clarissa, por essa apresentação. Me diverti aqui ouvindo a sua voz, adorei a música, ficou ótima a edição. Obrigada mesmo. Bom, gente, eu vou passar para o inglês, porque ficou combinado essa língua comum entre o professor Mignolo e eu, tá certo? Então, hello everyone, good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, good evening, I'm not sure where you are. And I'd like to start by saying thanks to the organizing committee for this invitation. It's a great honor, a great pleasure to be here today, and a learning opportunity to have this chance to share research experience, interests, reflections. And I also thank you all for the effort to plan this to plan and to make this event possible, because I've seen how hard you've been working. So thank you very much. Professor Walter Mignolo, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here today, along with many other scholars committed and engaged with Southern Onto epistemologies. Your work has inspired our decolonial studies in Brazil. So I also thank you very, very much for kindly accepting this invitation and for joining us in this different format of conversation and different discussion. My intention with the photos that you have just seen was not only to consider a more multimodal introduction. Those photos are also a way to emphasize two dimensions of my academic life that I think that are connected to this conversation today. So first, the photos explicitly reinforce that we are never alone. Perhaps in certain practices, because due to the Cartesian, the neoliberal rationality, we tend to believe that this academic work is individual and lonely, that we lock ourselves in our offices and write papers and prepare classes. But this is not, in fact, how academic life works. Everything we do is collaborative, collective. A written paper, for instance, is very much connected to the group work we do, resonates other voices, communities, classes we teach, students, debates we experience. So that's why I also thank very much for all the study groups I'm taking part at the moment and the ones that I took part in the past, because all of these groups have shaped my decolonial studies and understandings. And the second dimension, those photos also denounce something. They denounce the whiteness in the academic spaces that I have been circulating. I'm sure that it was fun to see the photos, but it was not difficult to realize that the majority of people in those photos are white. Very sadly, whiteness is almost always framed as natural in Brazilian academic spaces in many of the Brazilian universities. Professor Aparecida de Jesus Ferreira, a Brazilian applied linguist and language teacher educator who researches racial identities, anti-racism, and critical racial literacy, explains that even though the majority of the population in Brazil is non-white, Black bodies are invisibilized under the myth of a racial democracy. So those photos are symbolically connected to the conversation that I chose to have with you today, with the aim at problematizing the role of the university in the 21st century and paying close attention to the changes and the new demands emerging in the world and impacting higher education. This way, what I brought today is part of my studies, is part of research, but it's also thoughts and questions and what concerns me, what causes discomfort, and what makes me think. So the central question for this conversation today is whether it's possible or impossible to decolonize the university. It has been very common to hear the question, how to decolonize the university? Or sometimes it's not even a question, it's a statement. And the way I see it, at least two significant and entangled assumptions constitute this idea of decolonizing the university. First, it assumes the university is a product of modernity coloniality, and as a result, a decolonial claim becomes essential. And second, the decolonial claim seems to be based on a kind of a desire and certainty that the university can and must be decolonized. So these two issues, one, assuming and making coloniality or colonialism, new colonialism in higher education visible, and two, searching for a decolonial project, for a decolonial option, are issues that I'm interested in studying more and learning more. So that's the idea, to have this conversation today with you and the privilege to talk to Professor Mignolo. So this is a conversation about possibilities and impossibilities of decolonizing the university, to problematize and not romanticize the university. That's why the exercise of analyzing limits, constraints is very significant for me. I know this conversation could focus on counter-hegemonic practices, but for today, I chose to focus on features more connected to the hegemonic globalization. Even though some people might say that sometimes I sound pessimistic, I do agree with Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, an Aymara Bolivian feminist, sociologist, historian, activist, when she says that nothing would be possible if we didn't desire the impossible. So my skepticism is only based on what is taken for granted. But before we start scrutinizing limits and possibilities, let me explain what I mean by university. Where am I located? So as you heard in the introduction, I'm geographically located in the south of Brazil at a public federal university So using the word university makes sense to me because it resonates with where I am situated. And public university means to me the inseparability among research, teaching, and outreach projects. This is my context. So at the same time, I know it's challenging to use this vocabulary because Brazilian higher education is very complex. It's a huge country with a lot of diversity, a lot of inequality. There are public and private institutions, different kinds of public, different kinds of private. Some are considered universities, others research institutes, others are teaching institutions, federal institutes, technological schools, so a bunch of names. Some of them are in urban areas, others are in rural communities. So there are a lot of features that we could mention, okay? But my point here is not to describe or homogenize the Brazilian higher education. At the same time, I understand that when we use the word university or higher education, we create a kind of an imagined community. And my intention is to raise questions and issues related to this imagined community that is connected to our local places, to our local experiences and practices that are part of the colonial matrix of power. And that's the reason for this conversation. Okay? So, Akili Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosopher, research professor in history and politics in South Africa, when discussing the future of the university in Africa, he explains that calls to decolonize are not new, in the sense that we find in history uncountable examples of struggles for the democratization of access, based on the idea that a more equitable redistribution of resources and services in societies brings better life conditions for people. In the case of Brazil, when we think about education, we find examples of struggles, such as the creation of schools for workers and not just for the elites, for the struggles related to educação popular, educação do campo, educação indígena, educação de jovens e adultos. If we celebrate Paulo Freire today, we know we are talking about. Or even the idea that public education must be available for all and that all children must go to school, for instance. So in this sense, we may consider that decolonizing education or decolonizing the university is at the same time an old project and a new project. But then we can ask, what is old and what's new? My intention here is not to separate them. Instead, the idea is to connect. And this connection between modernity coloniality or colonialism and global capitalism or neoliberalism resonates with another question that Akili Mbembe raises when he asks, what are the limits placed on the decolonization project by the forces of neoliberalism? How are these neoliberal forces affecting the future of the university? According to Boaventura de Souza Santos, the Portuguese sociologist who has written and published widely on issues of globalization, colonialism, and southern epistemologies, the university is being shaped by two apparently contradictory movements. One that he describes as a bottom-up movement and another one that is a top-down movement. And it's about these two movements that I'm going to talk about to bring some reflection and questions for us. So let's start with the bottom up. He explains that the bottom up movement has to do with the social struggles for the right to university education. Similarly to what Akili Mbembe mentioned in regards to the democratization of access. So Sousa Santos explains that the elitism of the university that reinforced class, race, and gender discrimination in society and culture for so long has been exposed, and we now cannot close our eyes anymore. He also says that these struggles have been successful in many ways, as we see that access to the university increases and new social groups are allowed entrance to public higher education now. And also that these changes are enlarging the social heterogeneity and the cultural diversity of the student body at universities. In the case of Brazil, again, we may connect this bottom-up movement with the affirmative actions in the last decades. In regards to the university entrance exams, for example, we had changes. The exams were exclusively controlled by what we called vestibulares, and now we find different formats and possibilities, such as the National High School exam. Also, there have been initiatives to introduce a system of quotas in public universities to guarantee access to students who have historically been excluded from public higher education. These changes, however, did not bring solutions for social and cultural inequalities and hierarchies we find in higher education. Sousa Santos mentions that access to education has brought a lot of frustration in many ways to many people. And this dissatisfaction with the university from social groups that just recently got access to higher education can lead to new social struggles for the right to education and for the right to an alternative education. So we still have a long way to go. It's not just about opening doors, but creating educational policies and dignifying conditions for people to stay and to fight their fights. And then I quote Akili Mbembe again when he highlights that. He says that when we say access, we are not simply thinking in demographic terms, although these are crucial. When we say access, we are also saying the possibility to inhabit a space to the extent that one can say, this is my home. I'm not a foreigner. I belong here. This is not hospitality. It's not charity. So this has a lot to do, this conversation has a lot to do, these ideas have a lot to do with decolonizing the university and how implicated we, professors, scholars, and students and staff are in these transformations. We may ask ourselves, for example, what is the connection between the increase to education access and the demands for anti-racism? Shouldn't it be the opposite? If redistribution of resources and services are rising, if there is more access and opportunities, why are we facing racism? Why do people find frustration, feel misplaced, disembodied, dislocated? So entangled with this bottom-up movement for the democratization of access, we find a lot of tension within the constitution of the university, the constitution of the academic and scientific knowledge entrenched in the Western civilization. So Akili Mbembe explains that universities are westernized in the sense that they are local spots of a dominant academic model based on an Eurocentric epistemic canon that attributes truth only to the Western way of knowledge production and disregards other epistemic traditions. And he continues by explaining that Western epistemic traditions are traditions that claim detachment of the known from the knower. And a bit further, he states, the knowing subject is able to know the world without being part of what world, he states, the knowing subject is able to know the world without being part of that world. And he or she is by all accounts able to produce knowledge that is supposed to be universal and independent of context. The problem, because there is a problem indeed, he emphasizes, with this tradition is that it has become hegemonic. This hegemonic notion of knowledge production has generated discursive scientific practices and has set up interpretive frames that make it difficult to think outside of these frames. This critique is very much linked to what many Latin American scholars who research modernity, coloniality, decoloniality, including Professor Mignolo, also explain. So they say that the knowledges in humanities are the result of Western modernity. The fields of study, such as sociology, anthropology, history, geography, philosophy, language, they echo rationalities produced by European and Eurocentric ideas and thinkers. As a consequence, the historically constructed and sustained academic structure disqualifies the knowledges of almost the whole population of the planet and theorizes from a very limiting theoretical set. This way, all cultures have been perceived in comparison with the European culture and founded in dichotomies: European, non-European, white, non-white. But also, such dichotomies not only denied violence and epistemicide and genocides they produced, but also deny ontoepistemic simultaneity, coexistence of different times and different spaces. So in the last 500 years, we have been intoxicated by these ideas that progress and development in modernity are beneficial. And the suffering caused to the colonized, to the underdeveloped, to the non-white is understood as a necessary sacrifice for modernization. So let's now consider the discourses, policies, and practices that we find in our institutions. If we agree that there has been democratization of access to education, how has this heterogeneous student body been valued? How has this heterogeneity shaken our own teaching and research? Has this heterogeneity been considered beneficial? In what ways? Why do we still find practices of exclusion in discourses of inclusion? Have the institutional policies and practices been reproducing or interrupting modernity coloniality? How has Eurocentrism been reproduced or resisted in our institutions? This list of questions could go on and go on, but my point here is to say that without scrutinizing and reframing seriously the understandings that we have of social justice that circulate among ourselves and in our institutions, there is no decolonization. Because the way I see it, there is no decolonial project detached from anti-racism, anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, anti-patriarchy. In this sense, to decolonize the university, we have to face the internal colonialism that inhabits us and that is also entrenched in our teaching, researching, and institutional practices. So even with the democratization of access, in many ways, in many subtle ways, class, race, and gender discrimination are reproduced as discourses of democracy and liberal social justice are framed by modernity coloniality. That's why Sousa Santos highlights that there is no social justice without cognitive justice. And that's why Professor Limário Menezes de Souza, this well-known scholar from the University of São Paulo, who has been making a lot of contributions in decolonial studies in Brazil, constantly restates that a decolonial project requires to identify, interrogate, and interrupt coloniality in ourselves as well as in the institutions. Okay, let's move on to the second movement that Sousa Santos mentioned. So the first one was the bottom-up. Now let's see what happens to the top-down movement. According to him, the top-down movement concerns the increasing global pressure upon the university to adjust and to submit to the relevance and efficacy criteria of global capitalism. To make matters worse, along with this global pressure, the current educational setting also reveals almost no financial resources. So Sousa Santos explains that the university's decapitalization process, intensified by the research for technological innovation and competitiveness in the global knowledge economy, resulted in the creation of an international academic market that serves as an alternative to sustain the financial crisis of education. In his words, he says that there is a disconcerting impact on higher education. The university, from being the creator of conditions for competition and market success, gradually transformed itself into an object of competitiveness, into a market. As a consequence of these both processes, the decapitalization of national education on the one hand, and the increase of transnational market of education on the other hand, the international education ends up reinforcing and rising the inequalities and the hierarchies between higher education in the global south and in the global north. So in this context, internationalization has often been framed from uncritical and liberal multicultural discourses, which celebrates the interconnectedness between different countries, cultures, universities, people, languages. Besides that, internationalization has been justified as a way to respond to the global demands and as a way to overcome the decapitalization of education. This means that internationalization is seen as a very lucrative alternative for higher education institutions to respond to the global demands. Unfortunately, very little has been questioned about these changes that reinforce epistemic racism, the hegemonic globalization, the unequal academic mobility flows, the recruiting practices of students and scholars, the educational rankings, the industry of publishing, the insecurity of students overseas, the knowledge control through the indexation of academic journals, the monolingualism of English in academic settings, the fact that international education is exported as a commodity, the reinforcement of Western values as superior to other forms of life and existence, and so many other features that could be mentioned. Professor Eduardo Restrepo, a Colombian anthropologist who works in critical social theory and cultural studies, argues that there have been profound changes in higher education in the last decades. He says that the university has been oriented by a business model in which discourses of productivity, quality of education, and internationalization emerged without much questioning and easily became naturalized. Along with this business model, he explains that there has been the establishment of academic practices and academic research based on the hyper value of productivity and publishing, mainly in index journals and in English. So he raises concerns to the consequences of this logic that sustains academic rentability, transforms students in clients, and does not solve the insecurity and precarious positions of many independent scholars. He also mentions that all of this system imposes new procedures of control, and that the academic research practices are strongly becoming much more controlled and framed. According to him, internationalization becomes an aggressive educational policy that normalizes the national academic practices. So different from the bottom-up movement, that in many ways it was informed from social struggles and democratic calls, this second movement, the top-down, manifests global forces that do not carry the same social intentions and desires. However, both of them reproduce modernity coloniality. And here is where we can see that the new and the old are entangled in this neoliberal globalization that reproduces and sustains modernity coloniality. As Sousa Santos explains, the financial crisis of higher education ends up working as a perfect excuse to force the university to adjust and submit to global criteria. In turn, such global pressure tends to highlight the university's elitism, grounded not only on socioeconomic, but also on racial, ethnocultural, epistemic, and sexual discrimination. So in the end, the university becomes more and more entangled in capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. And in the name of quality, higher education constantly reproduces symbolic violence and epistemic racism. So, to close, now comes the question again. Is it possible or impossible to decolonize the university with all of these things that I am considering here? So raising questions and analyzing implications and complicities have been, for me, a way to visualize the challenges to decolonize higher education. From the way I understand it, there is no decolonial project without taking into serious consideration the complexity that lies in capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, and how they constitute the hegemonic knowledge production and the coloniality of being, and how our academic subjectivities are constituted by Eurocentrism. Some weeks ago, I was watching this interview with Vandana Shiva, this Indian scholar, ecofeminist, environmental activist, and anti-globalization writer. And she was explaining why there is this urgency of building agroecological movements and how important it is to support these movements that are doing agroecology. She made a pedagogical analogy by saying that the same way Columbus came with the discourse that he discovered America while going to India, agrochemical and agricultural biotechnology corporations are producing discourses of themselves as the ones discovering genetic information about seeds in order to force patents and knowledge control. So according to her, what is really happening is a convergence of information technology and biotechnology by people who control power and money, who steal local knowledge, knowledges from agricultural communities, transform these knowledges in a monocultural knowledge, and enrich with the myth of technology, progress, development, globalization. So how does this example connect to decolonize higher education? Who is producing the convergence of information technology and biotechnology? Who benefits from this kind of research? Who benefits from our research? Akile Mbembe explains that in the process of decolonizing the university, there is a precondition of understanding the promotion of these intensive associations between the transnational industry and the university. According to him, the university has been refounded with the purpose of producing knowledge for global markets in an economy that is knowledge-based in times of global competition. The consequence, he says, is that higher education is regarded as a key target for growth, development, and the progress paradigm. Sousa Santos also says that because there is this mutual interest and interconnection between capitalism and colonialism, the conflicts will become more intense. And according to him, it's not going to be possible to decolonize the university without demercantilizing education, to fight against the neoliberal rationality entrenched in education. His proposal then is to work against the academic capitalism and the academic colonialism with a movement based on pluriversity and subversity, what he understands as counter-hegemonic and subversive practice. For this to work, he says, the university will need to self-reflect on its own walls, divisions, isolation, and disciplinary control, reinventing connections, articulations, relationships, knowledge production, authorship, and being able to fight against all kinds of monoculture and exclusions. Finally, he highlights that this is not going to be easy. that this process is not going to be easy. Intercultural translation and a project based on pedagogies of conflict will be necessary. So to decolonize, higher education needs to stand as an education that refuses suffering and oppression of all kinds. Thank you very much for listening to me. So these were the ideas that I brought today for this conversation. And now it's going to be a pleasure to hear Professor Mignolo and also the questions that people from the chat can share with us.
Juliana, thanks for this very instigating presentation. Provocative. Thanks a lot. Professor Mignolo, I'm going to bring you to the screen then. Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much, you both, for being here. And now I'm going to leave it for you too.
All right. So that was wonderful. Won't be a debate because I agree. So the question will be to just talk a little bit more about some of the points that. But I will start with two tidbits that came at the end. Yeah, the agroecology, I am working with a group in Ciencia Andina and in Buenos Aires that has been going on for 20 years. Well, they are in connection with Vandana Shiva and all that. But agroecology is very important because it's related to food. What do we eat? How much do we know where what we eat is coming from? And that should be part of education, not just higher education. It should be part of education from high school to master to BA, etc. So, and the problem of the universities that concentrate on philosophy, science, the human science, and theology, and all these kind of things that are basic for living. So that education, this kind of education doesn't matter if it's happened at the university or not. The only problem with the university is that we are tied up because we need a diploma. we are linked because of that. So I think that is very important in relation to some of the issues that you were talking about. When you were kind of summarizing Membe, I thought that you were talking about Aníbal Quijano, who was talking about these kind of things, about knowledge, about knowing and the known. When I talk about subversion, I thought that you were talking about Catherine Walsh, who was talking about the cracks. And when you're talking about the relationship between the university and capitalism, I thought that you were talking about Bill Redding's 1989, The University in Ruins, and I thought that you were quoting me a couple of articles that I published about 20 years ago about the role of the humanities in the corporate university, and the other longer one, at the end of the university as we know it. And that both arguments end up with Amautaiwasi. So Amautaiwasi was, so when Membe was talking about pluriversity, I think it was talking about Escobar, myself, and all the people, Hinke Lammer, who in the 90s introduced in this conversation. So there is a different archive. I didn't read Membe, but thank you for summarizing it. I agree with Ashil. So the question is, can we, should we, is that possible? I think we have to start from there. I mean, I think you said it. The colonial matrix of power not only control, let me go back. Quijano said there are kind of the colonial matrix of power is articulated on three coexistent movements: domination, exploitation, oppression, we can say after Lugones, and conflict. So it's in the area of conflict with decolonization, decoloniality. Come But it's not the only way to kind of realize that university is becoming a business. So there is a lot of people from feminists and racists, anti-racists, etc., who are kind of raising those issues. So because of the top-down, I don't think that we can talk about decolonizing the university. However, we can talk, and we should talk, about what kind of work we can do at the university, since we are there. And as you said, we are the colonial measure of power control the dominated and everybody, including those who dominate, who are kind of trapped into a kind of subjectivity of patriarchy and domination. So, and the work we can do at the university and around the university, I see it in three kinds of work. One is the very history of the university. As you say, who created the university? There were a university in China, in Zimbabwe, in the Arab world. They have institution of education, but they don't have university. The university, the first university in China, the University of Peking, was 1905. So there is a history of the university, but the history of the university, there are two histories. One is the history of the university in Europe, and the other is the expansion. I mean, the university became like McDonald's, right? This is the center, and then you kind of install a university. And something very interesting happening now at the level of the university, because that process that started from Europe toward the rest of the world, now United States is going to China, to Singapore, to the Middle East, desperate to control their education when they are using. So I won't call that decolonization, but I call that de-Westernization of the university. Mm-hmm. The university, the museum, who are two institutions that control knowledge and subjectivity. So the working on the history of the university and opening up what kind of other institution, number one, what other institutions are being created, like Amautaiwasi, mm-hmm. and what can we do? I mean, we faculty students, and for me, the summer school has been a tremendous, there is no diploma there. There are just people who are concerned about being controlled by knowledge and kind of trying to link, etc., etc. So that is one way to that I see it. The second one is, I don't think you can decolonize the curriculum, because the curriculum now is very much controlled by the administration. The administration, as you said, and Bill Reddy said it in 89, is becoming more, the university 30 years ago, he saw that we're becoming more and more corporate. Mm-hmm. And becoming more corporate didn't mean that that the university raised money, at least in the United States. The concern was that the university are run as corporations. Mm-hmm. So in that corporation mentality that is taking over, and the university, private or state university, are linked to capitalism. It's no longer controlled by theology. That was the case until the 18th century. From mm-hmm. 18th century on, the building of the nation state brought the kind of the Kantian Humboldtian university with a specific type of mentality, etc., etc. So, what kind of work can we do within the university? And in that relation, what kind of seminar, meetings, courses can we teach, introducing the question of decoloniality within the university? I mean, I have been doing that for 25 years. It's not very effective because we are a small group, but I mean, but you cannot pretend that we are going to solve the problem. But it's very important that each of us, as you said, contribute with our own location wherever we are, in this kind of horizon. And I finish with that. One horizon in higher education is that the higher education tied up us up with the title, and the other thing is education without the title. And that is Ivan Illich. Schooling, no, I don't remember. The schooling, I don't remember.
The schooling society, I think.
The schooling society.
The schooling the world, something like that.
The schooling society. So, and the center he had in Cuernavaca, and that was 74. So I think that also, and finish with that, for us in South America, it's very important to pay attention what happened to us. What I like about Membe is that he paid attention what happened to in Africa as a black, and he said, I am concerned about Africa in the world as a kind of black African. So I think we are not black African, we are not in Africa, we are off-white, South American, and I think we have to look at ourselves, our own belly, pay more attention, because that's another way to kind of decolonize knowledge. To not depend on what our other people said, but what our people said, what kind of problem they face before us. So if we don't recognize that, we just create this kind of constant newness. Who can I quote now? Who is the new one? Who is the new voice? And that, as you said, is kind of reproducing coloniality of knowledge, even if the people we quote, we agree with them, right? But there is another level that is important. So those are my comments, and I invite your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for being so kind in this conversation. I agree with you as well. Yeah. So it's interesting that we do not have questions because we don't disagree. But
I have one question, but fine, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for you too. But anyway, it's good to hear that you were what you said about this top-down process, that you also don't believe in this decolonizing the higher education, because this is the concern that I've been having, this romanticized idea that we are going to change the university just because we talk about decoloniality. So I think I see the process quite similar to what you were saying. I think when I imagine an education that is completely different from what we have today, it's not going to be the university. It's going to be something else that we don't know yet, a kind of institution that we haven't created yet, that has to be born. So this is what comes to my mind. That's why the idea of imagining the impossibility and playing with this idea that we have to consider the impossibility as a possibility, because what we have as possible is not working at all. It's just creating more violence and exclusion. So this is one aspect that was important to hear from you. The second thing is that sometimes I hear this confusion in that because we are in a public education, we are not neoliberal, or because we are in a public education, there is no tuition involved. But this is not the point. The point is this rationality that you mentioned that is there, and pressure, giving pressure in our academic work and teaching and research. Yeah? And the last point that I would say, I agree with you that we have to consider Latin America and how we see ourselves in Latin America, and how can we rebuild the idea of education here. And I also think that we can learn with all of these epistemologies of the South in dialogue, in a sense that different experiences can make us think about our situatedness, our location. But one concern that I have, and it is a question for you, and maybe just to see your experience on that. Sometimes I feel that our experience with decolonial thinking and decolonial studies is very much at a rational level, that we are like conceptualizing. And I'm concerned if we are repeating Cartesian behaviors. This is my concern. How we break with this decolonial theory at the same time that we break with the body experiences and ontological experiences. So maybe, I don't know if there are experiences in your academic life that you could share about that.
Okay, so two things and then my question. One observation, I address your question and then I ask my question. The observation is, I like what you just said, I mean, about the impossibility and the possibility. I have been talking about that we in the planet and the pandemic just made it visible and accelerated something that was coming before, which is that we are in a change of era and no longer an era of changes. In era of changes, you can arrange things adding a prefix post. Post-development, post-education, post-university, post-todo, as there was a bar in Salvador de Bahia, I remember, it's a post-todo. It's a change of era, and this change of era is, what you say goes in that direction. Is it? We don't know what is going to come, but we know that university doesn't work anymore for all the reasons you said. We don't know what kind of governance will come. We know that the nation state is not working anymore. So we are working in that kind of conjunction. The change of era is not just something that will happen next Monday at 7 o'clock. The change of era is something going on, and it's very important for us to be aware of that. Yeah, no, that is, everybody's talking about, I mean, there are a lot of people are talking about an expression that I don't like it, but I agree with why people are using it, which is senti pensar. And the problem there is, as you mentioned, that rationality, first theology, and then rationality, because theology also blocks sensibility, right? And then Descartes put reason instead of God, and blocked his own sensing. And blocking your own sensing is sensing. Is sensing that that thing cannot control your mind. So what we are trying to do now is kind of get out of that. And one of the ways I am doing it, and with other people like Rolando Vasquez, that we have a decolonial summer school in the Netherlands for 11 years, and we talk about these kind of things, but we just give it a diploma, not a title. So we introduced the concept of aesthesis, and I will talk a little bit more in my talk.
Okay.
So we have to kind of reduce epistemology and aesthetics to its own size. They have the right to exist, but they have no right to be universal. So we have to introduce another concept like Nauseology, that is not just the principle of scientific and philosophical rational knowledge, but Nauseology is knowing and sensing and believing, and that is related to aesthesis, which is sensing. So there is a lot of things going on there, and to say that in a very, very simple way, and I think you did it in a way. When we start talking and writing, not controlled by the discipline, I forgot about that, not controlled by the discipline, but from our kidneys, from our stomach, with anger.
Yeah.
With anger. So that is, and I think I see that in a lot of places, and I know myself, because when I wrote the darker side of the Renaissance, I came from semiotic to, at that point, colonization. I didn't know coloniality and decoloniality. But I wrote that with anger. I was not trained in cartography, I was not trained in historiography, but I was angry, I want to say something like that. And I use reason, and I use argument. So that is what I have to say for the time being. Now, that I agree with you, and this is my question, I agree with you that both top-down and bottom-up are kind of remain linked to modernity coloniality. I agree with that, but I don't understand yet your explanation of how bottom-up reproduce coloniality modernity.
Okay.
So I understand. I mean, I agree because of my intuition, but I am not sure of the argument.
Okay. Thank you for this explanation about sentir pensar. Yeah, I was just realizing that the moment that I ask the question, I'm reproducing this separation, and the separation actually doesn't exist. So it's complicated.
But we are
caught in this.
We have been programmed, and it's very difficult. We have to be very attentive. Sorry.
So my idea with this bottom-up perspective, this bottom-up movement, was saying it's connected to the social justice, I guess. Because many times I see that the understanding of social justice is based on the redistribution of the same. Yeah, so the same language, the same classes, the same knowledge. So if I think about that, we have a body of students coming to the university that before they were completely excluded, and now they are there. And I don't see any changes. I don't see changes in the curriculum. I don't see changes in the classes. I don't see changes in the pedagogical practices. So what kind of social justice is that? So this is my concern, that sometimes we have these courses of redistributing the same or giving access of the same, but the same is this modernity. The same is the status quo that is not questioned. So that was the point that I was trying to make.
Okay, thank you. I want to just add 3 points, repeating that because I realized that what I said before, I kind of jumped and was not clear. So I want to just kind of make the three tasks of doing the colonial job at the university. Now, one is the history of the university, the history and the history, starting from here, of the universities in the Americas. So 1535, Santo Domingo, 1552, Mexico, 1555, Lima, 1575, Cordoba, 1636, Harvard. And then in this 19th century, that was in Africa, Asia, etc., etc. So that was the kind of the history of the university. We have to understand how this university came to us, kind of secondhand. So that is important also to pay attention how the indigenous people or the Afro-descendant are organizing their own university because of the racial and sexual issues that they are not allowed, or they are allowed. They have a lot of problems at the university. In the 90s, I used to go a lot to the University of Sao Paulo. I learned that Milton Santos was the only Black professor recently hired. Well, so that is a question of the history of the university, and that connects with the second point, that we have to decolonize the idea of the university in the public sphere. That is a very important work that we can do it through research, publication, but also in the public sphere, organizing meetings, op-eds, whatever, kind of changing the idea of the university. People talk about decolonizing nature. You cannot decolonize nature because nature doesn't exist like the university. Nature is an idea. So you have to decolonize the idea. That's very, very important. That is something we can do because we have a privileged position at the university that allow us to do this kind of job. And the last point is the discipline that has to do with, you were referring, the discipline are controlling us. So we always say that we, the colonial, are not interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, we are undisciplinary. So the question is, do whatever knowledge you need, you consider that is needed for the kind of the purpose you described wonderfully in your presentation. So sorry, Clarice.
No, it's been fantastic to listen to you both, and lots of thoughts in my head. But there is a discussion going on the chat on YouTube about the choice of English to talk about decoloniality as usual. These discussions always, come up when we have conferences, and especially online conferences like this. So I would like perhaps to hear you very briefly, and there are lots of questions as well. So if you don't mind, we're going to move on just to shorten the break to 10 minutes, since we are all speaking from home.
Yeah.
Give us plenty of time. And then we have a little bit more time for the debate. So I would like you to know your position about this, how you would react to this idea that the choice of English for a conference on decoloniality is colonial. My own perspective is that every language might be colonial in that sense, or at least the 5, classical languages are colonial anyway. But we would like to hear you about this. And then I'll call Daniele to the scene, and she has selected some of the questions. I'm afraid we won't be able to go through all of them. So please.
So Juliana, what do you hear? What is your reaction?
So just to explain that, we're using English because English is a common language that we have here. So this is it, yeah? We could be using another language. Yes, we could be using another language. The idea is to find a common place to share and to exchange. But the point is that when we consider the possibility of not using English, we're considering to use another language that is not so different. This is the point. So the idea of thinking that we might choose a language that would not be colonial puts us in a place that we would be outside coloniality. And this place doesn't exist because we are in the colonial matrix of power. So it doesn't depend on the language that we use. It depends on what we say and why and how we use the language. So this is how I understand. But of course that I also disagree with this movement of English for all and the academic, that English has to be in academic life everywhere. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense. And I see this in internationalization. Like, for instance, we have international students in our university. And we do teach Portuguese because most of our students speak Portuguese. And then you receive a student who speaks Spanish. And then all of a sudden the institutions want us to teach in English. It doesn't make any sense. So it's a different context. This is what I see. I don't know if it makes sense to you too.
Oh, yeah. No, I have been asked that question for 30 years since I wrote The Darker Side of Renaissance in English. But I would say, yeah, I think I agree with that. We should not use English. We should have the discussion in Aymara or Nahuatl, or one of the 33 languages of Maya root. That would be fantastic. If we cannot do that, we can do it in Spanish and Portuguese. Spanish and Portuguese are imperial languages, except that there are second-class imperial languages. And we have to be aware of that the Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese are imperial languages, but second-class because of the 18th century was German, French, France, and English. Third, English is a Caribbean language. It's an Afro-Caribbean language. And it's the language of Nigeria. Chimamanda Adichie writes in English. It is the language of India, like us. I mean, Chimamanda Adichie and us, the kind of colonial language in the colonies. So that's another question. We don't solve the problem when we speak in Spanish and English. We have another problem to solve, at what point the Spanish and English became secondary. Third, if we speak in Spanish and English, I mean Spanish and Portuguese, we remain within a Spanish and Portuguese audience. If we speak in English, we can reach China, and we can reach Zimbabwe, and we can reach. Because English, like Spanish and French, are colonial languages. And finally, I will say, English is not my language. I am just using it. And I use it politically.
And literally, in the sense of the word, right? I'm using it for my own purposes.
But yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that is a very important twist. I would say, what kind of work can we do within the university? How can we use the university knowing that the university is using us? That is very, very, that changed everything, as Naomi Klein said in the title of the book.
Okay, we could have another DELA just to discuss this issue, right? That would be interesting. Okay, let me just get Daniele then to the screen with her questions. Okay, Daniele, you ready? Your mic is off.
Now it's on.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just looking for the precise messages. Well, first of all, I have here with the first one. Fabíola Damascena. She says, parece controverso debater colonialidade e escolher o inglês como língua de debate e as interações no chat. Se Juliana é brasileira e Mignolo latino-americano. E aí eu vou dar sequência a outra, tá bom? Outra mensagem. A Mônica...
Eu acho que essa do inglês a gente acabou de comentar, né? A dúvida sobre a língua. Uhum.
E aí vai... Então, vocês já querem cancelar essa dúvida? Eu passo para outras questões? Acham que já foi respondida por completo? Então, tá certo. Então, vamos à pergunta do... Cadê o Rodrigo, que estava aqui agora há pouco? Gente, são tantas. Anotei o tempo dele. A Mônica Espeviorin pergunta quem valoriza o bilinguismo dos indígenas, mas o inglês se torna a língua de prestígio, diferente do espanhol, que também é visto como idioma subalterno. Qual a opinião de vocês? Quem valoriza o bilinguismo dos indígenas?
Eu não sei se eu entendi, porque tem uma falha no áudio e me cortou.
Quem valoriza, basicamente, quem valoriza o bilinguismo dos indígenas. Falar um pouquinho sobre os indígenas brasileiros que falam português e as suas línguas maternas. I hesitate saying this word, mother language. But you get the point, I guess.
Who values and how the indigenous languages are valued. That's the point, yeah?
Who value what? There is some kind of background noise.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's who values the bilingualism of our originary peoples here in Brazil. They speak their own language and the colonial language, Portuguese. So what about valuing this kind of bilingualism? She or he wants you to comment on the bilingualism, basically, I guess.
Yeah. Would you like to start, Professor Mignolo?
No.
Yeah? I'm here just thinking about the answer that you just gave when we see Portuguese and Spanish becoming in second place when we look at the privilege that English is receiving. So I think it's connected to that. This morning, I was talking to a student of mine, and we were discussing this, why certain schools in Brazil have been getting this label of escolas bilíngues, bilingual schools. But what is bilingual? What is being valued? The English in this globalization. So the question is how we see the indigenous languages. We know very well that they are not recognized. They are recognized in the Constitution. But in reality, in life, we see that there is this connection with the languages that are valued and the languages that are socially accepted, let's say like that. But of course, it depends on the schools, it depends on the universities. I'm here talking in a position that I'm in the south of Brazil, in a university that I'm not connected to indigenous languages. So I am not sure if other places it would be different. I don't know, Professor, from your experience, how you see these indigenous languages and the value that they receive or not.
Well, the question is power differential. We have to start from there. And there is a power differential to start with between Portuguese and English and Spanish and English. Now, there is a different kind of power differential between indigenous languages and Spanish, Portuguese, or English, or French. And I would say two things there. I have a lot of Aymara friends who are intellectuals and activists, and also in Ecuador, Quechua friends. And they have been saying for years, because they started with claiming bilingual education right. And then they say, well, that is not enough. Cultural right, and that is not enough, epistemological rights. So the question is, and the problem here, they say, is that we have to learn Spanish, but the Spanish people don't have to learn Quechua or Aymara. Now, I would say that they have a tremendous power in their hands because they know the indigenous languages, they know Spanish, while the Spanish only in general, only need one language. So they are in the power position of the slave person. The slave person knows the reason of the master and the reason of the slave. The master only knows the reason of the master, and at the end will lose. That is clear. I mean, the future we were talking is the rest of the world kind of swallowing up the kind of modernity, coloniality. And the third point is a fantastic book by Liane Betasamoke Simpson, who is Anishinaabe from First Nation in Canada. And she has a fantastic book that I always mention and I use and quote and use in my my seminars, Dancing in Our Turtle Back. And she does a phenomenal job working through Anishinaabe concepts. And each page you have to go to the index to say, what is this? What is this? She gave a kind of, and she said, for example, at the beginning, all this kind of theory, the colonial social movement, post-colonial, post-modern, it's very interesting, but have nothing to do with us. For us, thinking is storytelling, and it is storytelling in their languages, but she has to work through English. So there is a double work there. They work in the community, rebuilding the community, re-emerging, as I say, and on the other hand, use English to debunk the discourse of the state. Because as the state said, recognition. And they say, wait a minute, who are you to recognize me? We don't accept recognition. Mm-hmm. So in order to reject recognition in the public sphere, they have to write in English. They cannot write in Anishinaabe. Mm-hmm. So that is another issue that requires another meeting.
Exactly. Sorry to interrupt. We're way ahead of time. So now we have we'll have a 5-minute break. Not a 10-minute break. Yeah, no. We'll have this break. It's, as I said in the opening, it's a strategical break. It's really important. But I just wanted to tell people who came in late that we're not doing DELA in English, entirely in English. So we're having different languages come to the scene according to how the speakers, the invited speakers, our guests, have chosen their language, the language that they prefer to use. So we will be having DELA in Portuguese, we'll be having DELA, well, just a little bit in Spanish, I'm afraid, but we're having different languages. But these are the languages that we are more or less familiar with. And also, as I said in the opening, we'll try to find people who can subtitle the recordings for us so that they can be made more accessible to other people. Also, the Libras interpreters, the Libras is the Brazilian sign language. They are also coming for the talks in Portuguese because we couldn't find anybody to translate from English into Libras or from Spanish into Libras. Just for the ones who were not here at the beginning. Daniele, sorry, but I think we'll have to have our break now. So thank you both very much, and thank you, Dani, as well, for trying to work your way out of the so many questions on the chat. You can, if you want, Juliana and Professor Mignolo, you can have a look at the chat later on.
And if you can copy and then send.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. We'll do that then. We'll copy and send you the questions. So in the hope that we can have some articles answering the questions in the near future from you both. Yeah, you could write papers about that. So we're having a 6-minute break.
Okay. All right.
No, just kidding. We're having a 10-minute break. We're going to be running a little bit late, but I don't think there will be much of a problem in 4 minutes. So let's have the 10-minute break now. The transmission is going to be, it's going to be running during these 10 minutes, because if we interrupt, we'll have to start the whole thing all over again. So we're just going to project a slide here on the screen, telling our audience that we are on a break, and we'll be back then in 10 minutes sharp.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ok, estamos de volta então. Eu vou remover a Ju, por enquanto, da tela, tá? Da transmissão. E podemos já começar com o professor Mignolo. Professor, if you want to just start sharing your screen. We are ready, I guess, and just turn on your microphone, please. Or can I do that here? Maybe I can. Yes.
Okay. Before sharing the PowerPoint, just a few words of a cappella without the PowerPoint. To thank you for this opportunity, kind of continue this conversation that apparently interests all of us here. And I'll also thank you for Juliana's presentation, that kind of open up or just give an overall picture of the issues confronting in the talk about decolonizing the university, decolonizing the curriculum, and I will add decolonizing the idea of the university. So in a sense, it's a continuation of that, but more kind of specific. And I thank Juliana for kind of providing the larger picture. And the more specific is, my point is this. It's very important to have this kind of discussion about the content, accepting that the university is something that is there and doesn't work for all the reasons that we have been talking about. That work on changing the term, the content of the conversation, the idea of the university, the idea of the curriculum, and being able to build knowledge that is not kind of prisoner to the disciplinary regulation. It's just kind of thinking. Heidegger has this kind of wonderful title of one of his articles, The End of Philosophy and the Beginning of Thinking. So I agree with him that the end of a lot of things, but the question is, what did he think thinking is? But that's another problem. So my talk is about changing the term of the conversation. That is the topic. And I prepared a PowerPoint because there is a lot of details. I could have talked about this because there is no illustration, there is no picture, there is no diagram, there is no sound. It's just text. But I prefer that you look at, I won't read the text, but I will just comment about each slide, but you will be kind of reading. So it's changing the term of the conversation. And I apologize for not speaking espagues. I know that a lot of Brazilians speak Portuguese, but I cannot do the reverse. So I have to speak either Spanish or English. And I want to say one more thing. You see this thing in the back of my back, in my back? This is art craft from Sao Paulo, from the plaza, the public plaza, the Sunday kind of art craft market. And that is about, I don't know, 35 years ago. It's either the end of the 80s or the beginning of the 90s. So with this introduction, I will just share a screen. Share a screen. Share a screen. Allow. I think we are in business, right? Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it, right? I assume you can see it. Okay, my title is trying to get the big screen, but I cannot do it. Well,
if you go to the bottom right,
yeah,
there is a box there with some arrows. If you click on it, it should be larger.
I am clicking in everything I see. Oh, here. Yeah, but I am in the same.
Yeah, no, nothing is happening. Perhaps you can enlarge just the slide by clicking on that plus sign there.
Well, that's what I was trying to do. I mean, there is a screen here that you.
You know what
Oh, I see. No, it's all fixed. I cannot do anything here.
I think we can read it, right?
Well,
it's visible.
Well, okay. Let's go like this. Okay, so my topic is, as I said, my goal is one of the tasks of the colonial task is changing the term of the conversation. If we don't change the term of the conversation, we remain within the rule of the conversation set up by modernity, coloniality. So the question is that I cannot do anything here. I cannot even move to the next slide.
Maybe you could try to share your screen again.
Let me see, share. Oh. Share screen. Screen sharing works best on a good computer. Don't show this.
Choose either full screen or just a tab.
The screen?
Yeah, try full screen. Yeah, it's coming. Yes, now everybody's there.
Do you see it? I don't see it.
Yeah, we can see it now. But not your slides. You would have to just if you can't see the screen here, then it might be a problem. Marco.
I can see you and me and
yeah, but then there is a tab on top of your screen. There is a tab that says PowerPoint or something, doesn't it?
This is stop sharing. You are sharing the PowerPoint, but well, I really don't see it. Now I see myself.
Because you're sharing your whole screen. Eduardo wants to help. So let's have the two guys here helping. How you do?
Let's try. Hi. Let's try. Maybe go to the PowerPoint now. If you, Professor Mignolo, can go to the PowerPoint now. You can click on it.
I click on it.
Now, can you? Yeah. This is a Mac, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so double click it maybe.
What? Now I disappear.
Okay, so minimize that. Yeah. Double click the PowerPoint maybe on the top there.
Yeah, I did.
And nothing's happening, right?
And now share screen.
You're sharing the screen, yeah. Marcos, any ideas?
Oh, yeah. Please click on share.
Well, now apparently it's working. Yeah.
So the PowerPoint's working, right? But it's not sharing anymore, right? Okay. So now.
Yes.
Now that.
Okay. Now try to click on the slide presentation as you did before, because I think now it should work. or at least try to go through the slide so that we can see if you can go from one slide to the next.
No. No. It's frozen.
I think he's editing this slide. He might try to click on slideshow on the menu on the top.
What is a slideshow?
It's up at the top.
Slideshow. Yeah, but it's not the same. It doesn't work.
Can you try and click on that, that red bar at the top of your PowerPoint presentation? Because maybe it's not selected. Maybe you're I don't know. That red bar at the very top.
This one?
Yeah, the bar at the top where the title where the title of your file is, where the name of your file is. We can't see your mouse at all. We can't see your what you're clicking at all.
Yeah, I click in whatever I can.
I mean, just try plan B. Perhaps if you, instead of clicking regularly, if you just click on top of the second slide on the left on your screen.
No. No.
It's because the PowerPoint presentation is frozen, I guess.
I think it is frozen, yeah. I think that's yeah.
But it's frozen over there, not in my...
Yeah, I can see your mouse now. Yeah, click that red bar. Now it should work. Yeah, that's the red bar. Now it should work. Now you selected the presentation. Now, if you click on the other slides now, they should work too, I think. But somehow it unselected. When you click the red bar, something went bright, right? So it selected the presentation.
Right. And then when I click the second slide, it goes back to the first.
Yeah, exactly.
Goes back to the first. Well, we have a problem here. I should have not done a PowerPoint.
Do you want to? Okay, so now you press the red bar, right? So now it's bright again.
Now try slideshow.
Try slideshow now. Yeah.
Wait a second. Now I have to.
Yeah, now it's unselected again. You see, now it's.
So share screen.
Would you like to send me the slides, Professor Mignolo?
We can do that.
Okay. Maybe it would be better. Yeah.
Okay.
We were talking about that, and I said, well, then you have to go.
Yeah, I'll work on the slides for you. My email, I'll send you my Gmail so that it comes like faster.
Oh, now it's working in my PowerPoint. It's not working there.
If you'd like to send it to me, can you see the private chat on your screen? On StreamYard? Yeah. Okay, so I'm sending you my email, my Gmail address, so that you can send the slides to that Gmail address there.
So you send it to my Gmail address.
I sent on the private chat on StreamYard. Yeah. There's a private chat. I sent my email, my Gmail address there.
But what is it? I mean...
No, you know what? Professor, send it to DELA's email.
Send it to DELA's email, yeah, and then
I'll download it from there.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll do that.
That will be better.
All right, so let me enter the DELA email.
We're sorry, but technical problems
happen all the time, right? Yeah, they happen all the time.
Yeah.
So which one of my email did you send it? The 1654 or the Walter Mignolo dot?
You can send it, I think, from any of them, but just to the DELA email that that you have been communicating with us through that one.
Yeah, you need to send us your presentation using DELA's email address. We're not sending.
Oh, I should do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, now I got it. Yeah. All right. Oh.
While we get this sorted out, people on the webcam can have a longer break.
Okay, kind of go. It went.
Okay,
Yeah,
so let me check the DELA email. I've still not received it. Let's wait a little bit because it's an institutional email, so it takes a little longer.
I should have sent it before, just before starting. Didn't think of that. I didn't anticipate this kind of problem. Never had that problem before.
Eduardo, I have it here. I can share it if you like.
Okay, can you send it to me? I mean, okay. I mean, either way, it works. I haven't received it yet. But if you'd like me to do it, Clarissa. Okay, I got it here too.
Ah, okay.
Do you want to do it, Clarissa, or you want
me to do
it? Either
go
way.
ahead then.
Okay. Let me download it. Let me download it and then open it. It should be fast. Salva. Okay. Okay, so let me open it now. I hope it works. Okay. I think I got it now. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen, right? Let's do this. So share my screen. Okay, so I'm sharing now. Allow. Okay, so Clarissa, can you select that now? Okay, so can you see it now?
Yep.
All right, so and now?
Okay.
Okay, so let me.
So,
I'm just gonna mute myself before we start, and then I'll. Okay, let me just mute.
Okay, Professor, I think yes.
Okay, so let's go to the first one because what I had to say before. Okay, the basic question is, why do we talk about what we do in the ways we do? So that is a kind of changing the term of the conversation means asking different kind of question and questioning not what something is, but instead how what it is came to be what it is. So any decolonial work for me start from there. Whether we talk about linguistics, the university, theology, capitalism, neoliberalism, etc. The basic question is, why do we talk about what we talk about the way we do? So let's concentrate on language and linguistics. You know this, but I would like you to kind of look again at the kind of the standard descriptions and think about why we talk about language and linguistics the way we talk today about language and linguistics. Who told us that that is the only way to talk about it? You see, that is the rhetoric of neoliberalism. Capitalism is not perfect, but there is no other alternative. So the question is to recognize that this is what it is, but because it came to be at some point, and we maintain it. And we try to change the content of the conversation, but we don't question the term of the conversation. And the trick is here that the seduction of modernity is such that it prevents us to ask this question, not because it prohibits us to ask this question, but because it works around in such a way that didn't occur to us to ask this kind of question until we run into decoloniality, and decoloniality means that we began to be aware of how coloniality works, and then we understand that coloniality is the darker side of modernity and is constitutive of modernity, is not derivative. Okay, we can go to the next one. So next to the standard definition that you just find in the web and dictionaries, textbooks, etc., is the etymology, and that is more interesting to kind of change in the term of the conversation. Not just what linguistic is, and but what does it mean and when it came to be what it is. Well, it's the science of language, but since 1847, that's quite recent. I mean, it's not, linguistic is not kind of coterminous with the Homo sapiens 4,000 something years ago, or almost, or the previous ancestor we have. It's very, very recent. And 1847, we were at the heart of modernity, coloniality, the heart of industrial capitalism, the heart of the kind of forming of the nation states, and also comparative philology. And that is very interesting because when we talk about Orientalism, we have to talk about philology. We cannot talk about linguistics. And when we talk about comparative literature and comparative linguistics, we have to talk about when the idea of comparative came to be. It's not a Chinese invention. It's not an Arabic invention. It's a Western invention. So, and linguistic is a noun. And linguistic without S is a verb. And that is a little bit more interesting. And linguistic as a verb pertaining to the study of languages, 1824, come from German linguistics. So the use of linguistic to mean of or pertaining to languages or languages. But we already saw what languages is. And again, was not a concept in Urdu or Bambara or Aymara. So next one. There is something there that I see if I can move it. There is a line.
Yes. Yeah, good. Thanks, Eduardo.
Okay, let's go to. So now to change the term of the conversation, I will introduce Maturana. Maturana concept of languaging. That has to do, it's a verb. It's not a noun. So Maturana notion of language is rooted in its biology of cognition. So we are changing the kind of the terrain here with the kind of Cartesian linguistics that Chomsky was talking about, and structural linguistics that Saussure was talking about, and how to do things with words that Austin was talking about, but he was not talking. Well, they were kind of the philosophy of the mind, but the philosophy of the mind is philosophy of the mind. It's not biology of cognition. Biology of cognition is the body who cognizes, not the mind. And languaging has to do with the body, not with the mind. You know? So biology of cognition presupposes the groundbreaking concept of molecular autopoiesis. So in that sense, we don't have languages, something that is there. We are languaging as human beings. I won't talk about animals and how plants communicate because that is another issue. No? So Maturana concept of languages allow for the colonial departure and the linking from languages as a sign system geared toward communication and transmission of information. This is more recent. Communication and transmission of information is after cybernetic, after 1947, 48, 50. So, and language is a verb, not a noun, and points toward the constant flows of living and dynamics of the nervous system and B, to their interaction among living organisms engaged in conversation. And Juliana was talking about we are never alone. We are kind of, the African have the concept of Ubuntu. So the cosmologies of Aymaras and Nahuatl, etc., is not just the kind of conversation or interaction between human beings, but between earth and plant and the universe and the energy of the universe, etc. So conversation, not communication, as a coordination of doing rather than transmission of information and communication. So we are moving here from being to doing. So the question of the essence and the question of being correspond to the era that is closing. Heidegger did a terrific job in kind of asking for the essence of entities, of things, but he bypassed relations and flows, and that is one of the signs of the era, the change of era, that we are moving into flows and to conversation, into everything moves. And it's very hard to trap the movement in a kind of quantum physics or theoretical physics formula. No? So conversational coordination of doing rather than transmission of information. And conversation brings to the fore sensing, emotioning, reasoning, and consciousness. So there is no reason to eliminate reasoning. The question is to reduce reasoning to its own deserved size. The Nahuatl, the kind of thinking for the Nahuatl was in the heart, not in the brain. So this is a kind of introduction to the change of the conversation, the term of the conversation, and kind of addressing the question, why do we talk about what we talk about the way we do? So we can move to the next. Okay, so elaborating on, elaborating on the concept of languaging and linking to the biology of cognition, and the fact that we don't have a languages, but we are languages. So languaging, and again, I leave the birds and the bees and all outside of it, is a sign of humanness. It's an activity of humanness. Since whatever many years you can trace our ancestors. And we can say singing, but singing sounds strange. But singing by singing means here a semiotic kind of language in the semiotic sense of kind of all kind of sign, not only verbal speech and writing. No? So the question here is to start thinking the advent to think the advent of coloniality from the origin of humanness, as Maturana will have it. So then we start thinking about what our ancestors did with the mouth and the hands. And this is very important, interesting question, because how speech came to be what it is? Because of the mouth. And when the mouth was liberated from just spending the whole day looking for food. I have deers in my yard, and I was born in the country, and we have horses. And horses and deers spend all the time in their forelegs looking for food with the mouth. And then our ancestors start kind of moving up and liberating the hands. And that was very interesting because the liberation of the mouth from laboring to find food, and the liberation of the hands or the upper extreme, liberated from the need to walk, just created a different kind of configuration. that is in the DNA of our ancestors. No? So the mouth, languages, and conversation began to kind of organize interaction among people, person, actors that have this kind of possibility of working together, coordinating what they were trying to do to take care of themselves, to take care of their children, to take care of their food, to take care, and the hand allowed also to collect food, be by hunting or then the agriculture, etc., etc. But the hands had another use. The hands was used to scratch, to make instruments, to build, and making in general. And one of those scratching was inscription of sign in solid surfaces. And for that, it needed some kind of instrument. I mean, it can be a stone, can be a piece of iron, whatever. But then what we call writing, and we come to that in a minute, so it's coordination of interaction. It's not just speech, verbal, oral, but it began to work on kind of a scratching surface to whatever, to give some kind of indication in the coordination, to remember something, to calculate the movement of the sun, the moon, etc., etc. No? So the hands and the mouth become very, very important for what today, after the 19th century, we call languages and the science of language and linguistics. So that the mouth and the hands are kind of write, escribir, graffiti, hablar, all these kind of concepts are etymologically related to kind of long tradition, but also to the preservation of those memories by the mouth, generation through generation, and also generation through generation by the hand. Think about the codices in Aztec and Maya civilization. Next, please. So I was talking about the doing, writing, speaking, and the scratching, etc. Now let's review some of the words we use daily without thinking too much about how do we talk about this. When do we start talking about this kind of word coming? Or again, how do we talk the way we talk about whatever we talk? So hablar is in Spanish is very interesting because it comes from Latin fabulare, and in all Spanish, not that all Spanish, but the kind of 15th, 16th century Spanish was used fablar. The mystics talk about those things that we cannot fablar about. Medieval Spanish. And then come parabolare, that is parabola, and that's a kind of Italian, but they can parlare, parler in France, in French, So these are kind of words we use to describe certain doing. Right? And well, in English we have a speak, but the speak is not derived apparently from Latin, and that is very interesting for the question we were talking about before, the kind of the constitution of languages, and then the power differential with coloniality is articulated among the languages. So speak is derived from Old English, and apparently not from Greek and Latin. So all English spekan, sprekan, to speak, utter words, etc. And somehow the Greek grapho got into the picture. And then we talk about graphia, right? As a kind of writing, script. Yeah? But then we talk about geographo and geographia. So geographia is a way of doing certain things to kind of describe with words or with maps the kind of the territories and the distance and the composition of the earth. So that in terms of what we do with the mouth. Now, what we do with the hands, we have escribir, that's derived from the Latin scriber, a European word, scrib, but that refer to an activity. Rayar, to scratch, that we say before. In English, we have write, and to write. But look at that, to write is not just to write a book, it's to score, to outline, to draw the figure of. So one writing comes scratching a piece of paper in alphabetic writing, in Latin alphabetic writing, or that is kind of the constitution of the modern colonial language. And then we have writing that comes from the Proto-Germanic ritan. And again, tear, scratch. It's not the kind of English composition we are talking about here. It's not the kind of the dictionary of the academy, the Spanish or Portuguese academy. We are talking about the kind of the way these kind of words that we use today in everyday, where are coming from. And you see writing at the end, it says to tear, to pull, tug, sketch, draw, design. So let's go to the next one and see what we do with all these kind of things. Now, I gave you some kind of outline of what happened before the advent of coloniality. So Eurocentrism, as the Quijano, is an epistemological question. It's about knowledge. Not about knowledge, but about knowing, about the regulation of knowing and knowledge. So all that kind of thing of the separation of the knower from the known, all this kind of regulation and meta texts that establish theology, science, and philosophy as superior way of knowledge, etc., cartography, etc., are all kind of manifestation of Eurocentrism. But then we have to make, because a lot of people talk about Eurocentrism and ask questions about Eurocentrism, and there is some confusion there. And I would like to kind of contribute a little bit to clarify this confusion. When we talk about Eurocentrism before 1500 is one thing. When we talk after 1500 is another thing. So, what is today called Europe in the 14th, 15th century was not quite yet Europe. Yes, was the myth, the Greek myth, that to the west was Japheth, and the kind of in the Bible, but in the Greek mythology was Europe, but was Western Christian. Western Christianity inhabits the territory that is today Europe. And the Western Christians were kind of marginal people after the Crusade because they lost the center, Jerusalem, and they needed to recover. And that has a lot to do with Columbus and all what happened landing in America and after the America. So at that time, what we have is the first known grammaticas. I mean, people don't need grammaticas to speak for 400,000, or we can say 2 million here. People were kind of languaging and they didn't need grammar. Why do you need grammar? What is the function of the grammar? Who wrote grammar? So we can ask that about Lorenzo Valla, but we know more about Nebrija. Nebrija said, when Queen Isabella asked him, why do we need a grammar? Well, Nebrija was clear. I mean, to expand the empire, you need to kind of the grammar of your languages. And then the question is that the grammar of Spanish and the grammar of Latin became the model to write the languages of indigenous languages. I was looking at, and I couldn't find any kind of grammar of Arabic or Mandarin. And the first grammar of Mandarin and Arabic was written by European. Interesting. So you began to see how grammar began to work in the constitution of coloniality and the constitution of Eurocentrism. But not yet. Until 1500, well, the Gramática Portuguesa is a little bit later, Gramática de la Lengua Portuguesa, 1536. So we have there the moment in which a Europe that a Eurocentric that was not Eurocentric, to be kind of redundant. Why? Because at that point, Europe was constituting itself, its own identity during the first period of the Renaissance, 1350, 1500. Was a newcomer because all the other civilization was tremendous civilization around that. I mean, Persia, the Egyptian, the Chinese, the Kingdom of Africa, Aztec, etc., Incas. So Europe constitutes itself as one more center, but not the center of the world, center on themselves. So that is a time in which the Omphalos syndrome is planetary. Every civilization believed to be the belly of the world. And that is what Cusco means. So there was nothing wrong with kind of being Eurocentered before 1500, because Europeans have the right also to consider themselves the center, because everybody else was. And they wrote the grammar of their languages, a part of this process. But the question is, when the Nebrija wrote the languages, is something is going on already in the papacy, but also among the king and queen of Castile. So Eurocentrism after 1500 is a different kind of ball game from 1500 on. So writing grammars of non-European languages is what began to happen there. So the coloniality of languages, managing and controlling, and the destitution of languaging, meaning not only that Aymara or Quechua and whatever was reduced to the Latin and Spanish languages, but they also destituted what people in Aymara, Quechua, the Tojolabal, they talk about what they're doing when they were talking, or what they were doing when they were scratching what we call the clodices. So writing grammar of imperial spoken languages was a kind of crucial moment in the constitution of coloniality through the control of languages and the grammar. The concept of linguistic didn't exist yet. So the next one. So this one is a continuation of what I just said. No, I use here the concept of constitution, destitution in a very kind of theoretical fashion that is parallel to modernity, coloniality, decoloniality, domination, exploitation, oppression, conflict, and constitution, destitution, reconstitution, which we will see at the end, and this is a kind of a decolonial work. So the constitution of European modernity meant the destitution of everything that didn't fit into that program. And that is where the kind of why we say the coloniality is constitutive of modernity. So constitution and destitution are simultaneous. I don't know about the history of the colonial history of Brazil, but in Spain, I mean, the constitution of the viceroyalty meant the destitution immediately of Incas or Aymaras, or I mean Incas, Aztec way of governance. And the constitution of the type of economy that began to emerge there, that we call capitalism, but I won't talk about that now, means the destitution of a different kind of economy based on reciprocity, on collaboration, etc., and not in exploitation of labor and expropriation of resources, etc. So the constitution of vernacular languages, what we're talking today, the six modern colonial European languages. Italian have the Renaissance, and we cannot avoid that. Not many colonies, but the Renaissance. Spanish and Portuguese, that is the first modernity, and then become subaltern languages after the 18th century in relation to French, English, and German. So the constitution of the vernacular languages have two kind of operation after the 18th century. On the one hand, intramural in Europe, the language of the encyclopedia that are kind of contemporary with the Industrial Revolution, and that changed the game of capitalism. The kind of the industrial capitalism is very different kind of capitalism, of mercantile capitalism that was before in place, and that is the kind of economy that Adam Smith talk about. So the constitution of vernacular languages imply the kind of after the 18th century, the destitution of the southern languages of Spain, because the global south, the south of Europe is part of the global south. The south of the United States is part of the global south. And Maghreb is the north of the south. So there is a kind of complication there, the way we talk about the things we talk, the ways we talk. So and then comes, after 1500, the destitution of non-European languaging. Destitution of non-European languages means two things. Not only that they control the grammar, phonetic, semantic, syntaxis, but they erase the let's say the native concept of their own languages. They make us believe that the Nahuatl or Aymara languaging was exactly like us, like ours. And so we have the grammar, and we will kind of put some order here because these people don't know what they are doing. No? So the destitution of non-European languaging, appropriation of the grammar, or also kind of erasing of the thinking about languaging that the people have, because they cannot think, they said. It means the destitution as trustable languages, and it means appropriation, in the sense that in this case, non-European languages are molded and made to fit into the European missionaries' mindset. So that is how modernity coloniality works: constitution, destitution. So next one. Oh, this is a little bit small. So now we are, so the first part I give you a picture of what happened before 1500 with all this kind of, the way we talk about writing and speech and language, etc. Then I gave you a brief kind of introduction to how modernity coloniality operates through the concept of languages and grammar, etc. And now we move into decoloniality. And I will go, without losing anything, I will go a little bit faster so we can have more time to chat. So languages and decoloniality. So and I said before, constitution / destitution / reconstitution. And that is a crucial in this sphere, not overall, but in this sphere, is the reconstitution of the destitute. And the destitute means the reconstitution of principle of knowing, Nauseology, that disobey epistemology. There is a story here about Nauseology and the Gnostic, but I am not talking about the Gnostic. I'm talking about the meaning of Gnosko in Greece, which means a type of knowledge that was related to techne. And techne was a skill to do something. Let's say a skill to speak, a skill to write a novel, a skill to paint, whatever. But also the knowing of that skill. So the shoemaker knows how to do shoes, but also he has not just the skill with the hand, but he has a knowledge about how to make shoes, why to make shoes, what are the meaning of shoes, etc. So I began to use Nauseology to reduce epistemology to its own size. And Nauseology means all kind of knowing, not just alphabetic writing and science and philosophy and theology. All this kind of regulation and control of modernity, coloniality. Humanness is languaging and knowing. So that is why languages is related to biology of cognition. Biology of cognition, I mean, humanness didn't need the Greek to imagine that they were thinking. The only thing that the Greek did was to put names to that activity, let's say philosophy. And then that kind of tradition of Greek was kind of captured and rebuilt after the Renaissance. And the discovery of America into this monster that is kind of the colonial matrix of power. But the Greeks are not a kind of private possession of the West. The Arabic, the Muslim thinking philosopher, Al-Ghazali, even Shina, even Rush, they were all kind of not just translating, but kind of creating through the Greek legacy. But came Latin and began to kind of destitute that kind of Arabic Muslim knowledge, and also destitute Arabic as a kind of trustable language. And the reconstitution is not just the principle of knowing, it's the principle of sensing. So then we introduced the thesis to disobey aesthetics in the same way they introduced Nauseology to disobey epistemology. So reconstitution of knowing and sensing had to do with one of the questions Juliana asked, how we kind of get into restitute sensing in the production creation of knowing and knowledge created. So, and 2 points on this point of languaging and decoloniality. So the question is the way of languaging that we have to kind of perform to do it decolonially. And to do it, to languaging decolonially, I have 2 points. One, I have been insisting, changing the term of the conversation. I start from changing the question. And so we ask this question. So the displacement, and here comes the displacement from being, asking for this essence, to doing. And again, asking this kind of question to move into changing the term of the conversation. What? Not how. How comes at the end? How comes once you know what, why, when, and whom? Then come, because if you start from how, you are already trapped, because the how leaves you into the what and the why that modernity set up for you, modernity coloniality. So let's get out of this, and that's the kind of languaging is helping me to kind of move in that direction. What to do decolonially in the semiotic sphere of language. Why to do it? Well, we know that, but it needs to be said explicit, and Juliana gave us a lot of arguments why to do decolonization, and she would say why to do kind of languaging decolonially. Where and when to do it? And this brings the important question of the geopolitics of knowing, sensing, and believing, because decoloniality is not an universal model, like neoliberalists pretend to be, to kind of homogenize the planet, but not just the neoliberal, the liberal too, but the Marxist too, and the Christian too. Everybody wants to kind of homogenize. So because they were trying to homogenize the planet, the entire planet was touched by modernity coloniality. And now the responses are local and depends on the memories of the place, but also the memories of the bodies. How these bodies also for classifying have been racialized, sexualized, have been ranked, etc. So decoloniality is connector. It's a connector of among all the people who kind of move in that direction, that looks for these kind of things, based on their own local history, memories, destituted knowledge, etc., etc. So who is or would do it? And this is what the kind of if the where and when is the geopolitics, the who would do it is the body politic of knowing, sensing, and believing. And this is what had to do with racialization and sexualization, but also the kind of demoting people because of their language. It's not just the color of the skin, but the way they speak English or French or German with accent, because they come from Turkey or come from Zimbabwe, etc. So it's the kind of the body politic of knowing, sensing, and believing that comes into the fore. And this, to move in that direction, reason is not the starting point. The disciplines are not the starting point. The question here is, what is bothering me? How coloniality is touching me? Where do I see and sense coloniality around myself? And in kind of the Quijano tradition, decoloniality only makes sense in relation to coloniality. If you are not aware of coloniality, you are using the coloniality in a different way. And it's okay if you use it. I am not a judge. I am saying, for us, the Quijano school of thought, to talk about the coloniality implies to know, to be aware of modernity coloniality. And part of the investigation is investigating how the colonial military of power was formed, was transformed, was controlled, is transformed, etc. So that analytic work is fundamental to kind of orient our kind of decolonial languages and decolonial doing. So how to do it is the last question. But that depends on the where, the who, and the local histories and memories of actors involved. Meaning that there is cannot be universal answer and model to address these questions. And that's what I was thinking before. I was talking to Juliana, or with Juliana, that our memories in the Americas are geopolitically different from those of Africa or India or China or Southeast Asia. And we need to kind of be aware and know that kind of geopolitic of knowing something and believing, but also the body politics. I mean, we were talking about Membe. I mean, Membe is African native or descendant of the native. America and Chakrabarti is Indian, right? And Shariati is Persian. In America, we have to be aware that the whole university and the state and all the institutions are controlled by people of European descent. Be Creole, in the sense of born in the Americas of European descent, be immigrants, like is my case, be mestizos or mestizas. But mestizos and mestizas in blood doesn't mean that it's mestizos in mind. In general, the mestizos and mestizas in mind are very white mentally. So they kind of follow the model, the reading, the thinking of European. I mean, you know as well as myself that there is a lot of cases in which thinking seriously by this kind of component of the population needs a security blanket. We need the Derrida, we need Deleuze, or we need Guattari. As Rodolfo Kusch used to say, is the fear of thinking in our own. So that is the question here, and let me say one more thing about the demography of the Americas, and this is very important for the coloniality, because the people of European descent, I am there, have a privilege in relation to the indigenous and the Afro-descendants. But we are second-class citizens in relation to Western Europe and relation to United States. That's one thing. The other thing is that indigenous and Afro-descendant now, not just in Colombia and Ecuador, but in the Caribbean for a long, long time, they have tremendous thinkers, writers, activists, etc. They are producing their own thinking. So decolonization or decoloniality, whatever, when they use that word, doesn't mean what it means for us. They have a different geopolitics and different body politics. They have been affected by, impacted by modernity, coloniality in a different way. And that is valid also for the example I gave before about Leon Simpson and the Anishinaabe in Canada. So they are in their own. They don't need us, neither the indigenous people nor the people of Afro-descendant. We need them. Juan Garcia in Ecuador has been doing a terrific work. Unfortunately, he passed away. Milton Santos. I mean, I think that Milton Santos has to be reread. At his time, he was not talking about coloniality, the coloniality how we talk today, but he was not doing a standard kind of geography, the discipline of geography kind of work. And you have other kind of thinkers in Brazil, indigenous. So the next one, the point 2 of language in decoloniality, and I finish there. So, conclusion. At the beginning of this talk, I asked, why do we talk about what we do in the ways we do? So I went through the basic vocabulary we talk about in the sphere of languages and linguistics, and then introduced the concept of language and biology of cognition and molecular autopoiesis. And I insist molecular autopoiesis because Maturana himself talk about this, insist on this. The autopoiesis he talks about is molecular, it's not cultural. A lot of people have, I don't know, used philosophy or whatever as a kind of society, as an autopoietic system. No, we are talking here about two different things. About things that has been made by human species, but actually human species, and those energies that created the human species, but that the human species cannot do. You can say artificial intelligence. Well, artificial intelligence is not quite the way of becoming that all the living organisms in planet Earth and in the cosmos came to be. So that's a kind of connecting language with the biology of cognition and with autopoiesis and thinking about the mouth and the hands and what can be done there. So my purpose was to change the term of the conversation to engage in the reconstitution of what has been destituted. So I conclude now with this kind of puzzle that I put in front of you with the hopes that will generate some conversation. So we started 15 minutes late, so we have some 15 minutes extra. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Eduardo, for sharing the slides with us. Yeah, well, that reminds me, Professor, of Boaventura's sociology of, it talks about sociology of absences. And, well, I forgot Juliana was to start the debate. Sorry, Juliana, I'm going to bring you to the screen.
You have that.
I'm so eager to discuss this. I'm terribly sorry.
Go ahead. It's okay. Go ahead. Yeah, it's no problem. Come on.
No, I was just okay. Just very, very briefly. Then, I was wondering if, when you talk about reconstitute what's being destituted, you were also talking to Boaventura's sociology of emergencies and sociology of absences. If there is a connection, if you see a connection there, or if it's a different approach.
Thank you for asking that question, because I have important, I would say, theoretical implication. You can see that in all the conversation that is taking place today, like, I mean, when Juliana was talking about Membe discovering that modernity separates the knower and the known, well, you have to look not at the said, but the saying. You have to look at the enunciation, because if you just look at the enunciated, you get lost. Oh yeah, this is similar to it. This is similar to it. So I will do an analysis of this and apply all these kind of concepts that I'm floating around, and they're more like the same. So the enunciation of Boaventura and ours is totally different. When Boaventura is a sociologist, he talks about the global south from Portugal, from the south of Europe, not from the south of the Mozambique. We are talking destitution from Quijano. So there are two different bodies involved. Sosa Santos was many years ago, he was not a kind of decolonial and all this kind of thing. He was somebody he felt in La Mano de Alicia that he was kind of being left out of postmodernity. So in La Mano de Alicia, he kind of react against the postmodernity of the North. And then he discovered decoloniality, and that's fine, but that is his business. The body and geopolitics we are talking about is not his. There are similarities between absence and destitution, but probably Boaventura learned from Quijano, but he won't say that. I don't know. I mean, it may be. It's just I'm not accusing.
Okay, let's keep ourselves on different turfs then. All right, sorry, Juliana. So
That's fine. That's fine. No.
good.
Yeah, I was prepared here, and now I got a little bit lost. But anyway, let's try to get back. First, thank you very much for the inspiring connections between language and decoloniality. And it was very good to see that you brought Maturana for this conversation, because we here, I mean, like we at the university where I work and the research group organizing this event, we are very much connected to the ideas that you were discussing in terms of languaging as an act, as a verb. And this is what has been guiding the work we do in language teacher education. When we say that language is not a code, language is not a system, but language is a social practice, is a social meaning. And the moment we use language, it's not just using language, but it's producing body and meaning and feelings and emotion. So it was very inspiring to hear you connecting all of these ideas. So it's one point that is very important. Another thing that I like it very much is to see that when you were describing the humanist and the prehistorical ideas, and when we think about hands and signs and scratches, we think about the body, the point that you're making, the body and the geopolitics that is completely out. And I think about Santiago Castro Gomes' work when he thinks about this 0 point, that there is no 0 point, there is always a body. So the importance of connecting language and decoloniality with the body. And I think this is also another concern that we've been having here in Brazil, in this idea that we can't separate the knower from the knowing, as you were saying. So thank you for all of these ideas and inspiring ideas. And a third comment that I'd like to make is this final comment that, yes, I do agree we have to look at Latin America and see how our geopolitics work here. And then I see this as a challenging, because all of us are colonized, in the sense that all of us need to understand how coloniality reaches us and is attached to us. And the importance of considering that we have plural projects of decoloniality. That was very important to hear that a concern that we also have been having here with this idea that is decoloniality is not one common project, that we have different groups, different situatedness. So these are some of the concerns that are very much connected to the things we've been studying and thinking in Brazil. So thank you very much for that. And I was here thinking about the idea of a question related to this verbal language. So many of the things that you explain and the examples that you brought come to this the power of European language that centralizes language. So then you kind of make me think that should we envisage different kinds of communication that are not relying on written language, are not relying on verbal language? For example, I was in another group and this question came, and now it came again. What is the role, for example, of silence in this decolonial project, for instance? So how do you see that in decolonial terms, the written language is losing power? Is it losing power, or it's a transformation of written language? So this is a question that I have, yeah. And another point, just to close my comments, it was interesting also to see the idea of understanding scratches not as language. Yes, this is also important for us because it's connected to the power that we give to written language and to verbal language. And then it remind me that Professor Lin-Marius Menezes de Souza work in Brazil with indigenous communities. He also discussed that the understanding that the indigenous pictures and scratches and that was not language, and in fact that was language. We that were not seeing that was language. So thank you for all this very inspiring perspective to connect language in different dimensions and different layers.
Okay, let me ask a question about your question. Could you repeat a little bit the question of silence? I think I missed a point there.
Okay, my point is that we are so connected to the verbal language and written language because of this logocentrism that we are part of it, that when we bring Maturana's concept of languaging and we break this idea that language is not verbal, language is not just the code, yeah, what are other aspects that we might pay attention? So what is the role of silence in this place?
Okay.
Because silence is not understood as language, for example,
Exactly.
but silence is language in the body. So how do you see that?
Well, that's wow. Well, thank you in the first place for kind of summarizing, underscoring your reading of my my talk and connecting with the work you are doing there, which I imagine that was the case by reading the abstract. Reading the abstract, your presentation. Well, this I can sign. I can sign this and publish under my name. I could have said that in it. So thank you for that. So let me just go with some of the specific points that you are making and underscoring. First, I will kind of underscore the question of speaking as an action. Because that could be also, I mean, people who talks about pragmatics. So the pragmatists were not convinced with Saussure. Right? We don't talk about structure. I mean, language is kind of action. So that's fine. And but to distinguish it from Maturana, because what I find very interesting in Maturana, and I think you got the point, is languages in relation to the organism, to the biology of cognition, and to the kind of molecular autopoiesis of the organism. And the fact that the organism is constantly responding and accommodating to two kind of two kind of triggering things. One is the kind of the cultural things. We are indignated with Bolsonaro and we don't like Trump and all this kind of like the pandemic. But also there are kind of we react in relation to the weather, to the a gray day seems to be sad and a sunny day seems to be happy and people go on to the bar, etc., etc. So that kind of, that's cognition. That's kind of biology of cognition. So languaging is related to that in the sense that I coordinate doing with the other because I am not myself, right? So that's the kind of distinguishing between action in a pragmatic sense and languaging in the kind of biology of cognition. There was another one there, the B, but I don't read. I don't. Oh, the first point that you make. I mean, the kind of the. When we began to, instead of going to language and linguistics, and we start from languaging and go to the disciplines, that is a way to kind of begin to change the way we talk about the humanities, the hard science, etc., and began to see the discipline as a regulation of languaging. A certain kind of language called physics or linguistics or historiography, there are kind of regulated languaging that we call a discipline. So that's another potential I see. And another potential I see, and that perhaps is the most important, and that's why I discovered Maturana in the 70s, and it's always there in my work, but it's only recently that I kind of emphasize the question, how can I link language with coloniality? And the question there is, what was the question? Kind of lost my train of thought. That if you look at the humanities, I don't know if you call it human science or humanity in Brazil.
We say
and you look at the social
humanities is okay.
And the social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And you began to realize that the regulation of those disciplines, at least since the 18th century, are based on the Western concept of science. Look at Kant, mm-hmm. Newton, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I don't have a scientist who thinks from a different geo-body politics, and that is what makes Maturana fascinating. He disobeyed constantly,
mm-hmm.
in a very intelligent way. And he said it at some point that he began, because he was a kind of a second generation of cybernetician in the 70s, etc., 60s. But then when he started thinking about these kind of things, about languaging and all that, is the years before the coup d'etat in Chile. He tells the story of their being involved with the kind of people, different factions, etc. So, and that's why Maturana ended up talking about democracy and talking about education. And the last point, the question of the silence. Well, this is a quite interesting, because silence is not just in the question of language, but music, for example. There is a group of decolonial musicians in Ecuador who are kind of working on the question of silence. So silence is related to everything related to sound. Yeah, could be. And that is interesting, because silence is like the void in kind of Indian philosophy. It's like chaos in Greek philosophy. And I don't remember that I have another cosmology, but what kind of a speech kind of breaks the silence is cosmos. It puts some order in the chaos. So that's what I have to say at this moment. And there is a dissertation written under Catherine Walsh about the question of the sound and the question of the silence. And there is now a PhD that work with a group of musicians that working on silence. I see Clarissa there, and I think I have the last point too.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, I will stop there because I lost the train of thought.
I am terribly sorry. I won't appear anymore, I promise. This is the last time.
Oh, that's fine.
I keep blocking people's...
no, that's your job. Because if you don't intervene, we just keep on going.
Yeah, we could speak forever, I think. Yeah, well, very fascinating questions, Ju, a fascinating talk, and the way you responded to Ju's question as well, Professor. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to call Daniele, because she has selected some more 2 or 3 questions, and she will put them together, and you can pick up the, whatever you wish to answer, because we don't have much time, but we have a little time.
Oh, yeah, I can stay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I can stay. So you have to translate the question.
Yes, she'll be doing that. Yes, okay. Dani.
I'm gonna bring 2 questions. You can take notes, but they are short, okay? So Thaís Deschamps, she asks, seria interessante pensar também qual seria o papel do conhecimento científico fora da universidade. Existe sem o outro? In English. It would be interesting to think about what is the role of the scientific knowledge outside the university? Does one exist without the other?
Scientific
knowledge exists without outside the university. It's her question.
Oh, that is why we talk about Nauseology. About scientific knowledge is a regulation. It's a way of knowing that is being regulated by people who destitute all other kind of knowledge. So we have to look at the limit, the possibility, but also the limit. Look at the pandemic, for example. Look at the debate on the pandemic, on the vaccine, on the control of the pandemic. A lot of scientists are questioning the scientists that support the pandemic. I mean, the vaccination and all that. Scientists are against other scientists who support that say that climate change is not happening. So there is a debate within scientists. But there is another kind of knowledge. Why indigenous medicine, Chinese medicine, has been destitute? They have much better way of dealing with health in the case of the pandemic. I know a group in Venezuela that kind of anti-Maduro and all that, but they were just kind of going into their own indigenous medicine. So scientific knowledge has to be respected, but reduced to its own size. So there is a politic of knowledge there. We cannot ignore it, but we cannot say, so we have to validate knowledge that are not scientific in the term that the scientists said that their knowledge is scientific. It's a way of controlling subjectivity. You feel bad, or you feel, the scientist said it, the scientist didn't say it. So that's the controlling subjectivity that Juliana was talking about, and that is very important to be aware of that if we want to the link, listening to, but not fall into a kind of religious belief of science.
Yeah,
I have another one here. Thaís, now, em português, como evitar o fatalismo quando falamos sobre a colonização do pensamento, sobre a linguagem, essa sensação de que ela é escapável. In English, how can we avoid the fatalism when we talk about colonization of thought about the language? This sensation we have that it is escapable.
I think I was distracted. I thought that you were talking in Portuguese, and all of a sudden it shifted to English. And can you repeat it in English?
In English?
Yeah.
How can we avoid the fatalism when we talk about colonization of thought about the language?
Colonization of the thought about the language.
Thought about the language.
Colonization.
If I understand, the point is that the way we talk about language is colonized. So how can we resist this? How can we go against the colonizing ways we have of talking about language? I guess this is what she meant.
I'm talking about thought.
Yeah, but thought about the language. So how we think about language, how we conceive of language, how we have language working in our everyday lives. This is usually pretty much westernized, Euro-centered. So how do we resist this? How do we go against it?
That was my thought. We have to start from someplace else. And in this case, I start from languaging. And if you start from languaging, that is Western, because Maturana is of European descent, but it's of Western. And so we are. So the question is always to start from someplace else. And you have to start from someplace, something that has been destitute. And the question of languaging have been destitute, have been prevented us to ask this kind of question. And so one tip there is never take anything for granted and ask how the things came to be what they are, what is kind of blocking on us, and where can we find another way to talk about this. So in asking that question, I found languaging, another way to talk about languages and linguistics and writing, oral, etc., etc. So kind of the linking from all that sphere of and that vocabulary, because we are trapped in Western vocabulary, even if we are Chinese or Arabic, Western vocabulary now, and that's another importance of speaking in English. To kind of to beat English in its own field, appropriating English and not being appropriated by English.
Yeah, this is what Antônio Bispo, the Brazilian Antônio Bispo, Quilombola, talks about. He says that we have to appropriate from the language of the colonizers and change its meaning to our own purposes, which is quite interesting.
I agree. That is, and that's what in another sphere, that's what China did with capitalism. They say, "Oh, that's capitalism. Thank you. Now I do it myself. I don't need the IMF. I don't need the kind of the central bank, the European bank."
Yeah.
So we have to.
I think we have time for one last question, I'm afraid.
So let's go to Eliane Azari. She asks, how can we use the university knowing that the university is using us? Como nós podemos usar a universidade sabendo que a universidade está nos usando?
Can you, because there is some kind of...
again, in English?
Yeah, but Clarissa is more clear, the voice.
Your sound, Danielle, it's coming with a kind of an echo, so
yeah.
It's hard to understand. Yeah, she's asking, how can we use the university to our own purposes, knowing that it is the university that has been using us?
I would say by doing it. And you have to invent the way to do it. I mean, I do it in my way. I have been kind of teaching and having a student and organizing events, not according to the curriculum or what the administration wants, but according to my own. And we are doing that in the Netherlands, in the Decolonial Summer School. Catherine Walsh did it for 20 years in Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar with a lot of problems. But she has done a tremendous job where kind of 200 people, 220 people in all these kind of years are kind of have been training coloniality, decoloniality. And they are all over Latin America now. And they are teachers, they are activists, they are artists, they are painters, and kind of keep on the ball rolling. So the question is always the question of how? By doing it. And you have to figure out. I cannot tell you how to do it. I can tell you how I do it. But we were talking about the geopolitics and the biopolitics. I am not you. So in that sense, the coloniality is a connector that connects me. I mean, we see it this afternoon. I mean, when I saw the abstract, I mean, we connect immediately, and then the Juliana talk on it. And that happened, and that's what English is important, because I cannot have this kind of conversation with people, I don't know, with people in Asia, with people in the kind of Eastern Europe that speak Romanian or Hungarian or whatever, or even in Europe. that is not England. I mean, the continental Europe is all other non-English language. Imperial, but not English.
But at the same time, I think we cannot forget that the meanings we are producing with this language are not the same. So we have to always be aware that misunderstanding is a natural thing to happen and not just an exception, so that we can really engage into conversation and exchange, because otherwise, if we take meanings for granted, then we lose the point of having a dialogue.
No, exactly, and do not respect the kind of the Modern Language Association rule for English. I mean, the question, I can answer that question, the last question, and saying, English is not my language, I'm using it.
Yeah.
That is a joke by Victor Borga, a kind of a Danish comedian.
Yeah, sure. Let's use it. And once I use it, it's kind of mine, but at the same time, it's not entirely mine, because language is not an object we possess, right? It's something we do.
And that is what border thinking. That's what border thinking is. I didn't talk about border thinking, but that is the source of and the need of border thinking. For us,
I love the idea of border thinking all over the place.
Because Aymaras writing and talking in Spanish are border thinking. They are thinking in Aymara. Within the Aymara cosmology, and the same in Canada. But they are using Spanish. Mm-hmm. And in the community, they speak Aymara.
So, being in charge of time here, I'm terribly sorry. I have to suspend our conversation for the time being. And thank Daniele and Juliana and Professor Mignolo and everybody else on the backstage here. We've been solving problems and trying to focus on what you were saying and chatting with people on YouTube. So it's been a very busy afternoon, but also very, very rewarding. Thank you both very much, and hope you can follow us through the week. We're having, these meetings for the whole week.
Tomorrow at the same time, or?
Yes, same time. Only that we are supposed to finish a little bit earlier, not only because of the slides, but because we're not having this long introduction at the beginning. So tomorrow we're supposed to actually really finish at 5.
So it's the same link?
I'll send you the link. Okay, it's for the people on you. Well, it's different links. It's different links every day.
Okay? So tomorrow I can be in the first hour. It's from 2 to 3.
Yeah, from tomorrow on, you both, Juliana and Professor Mignolo, you are going to be a participant on YouTube. So, you will be working participating with us on the chat only, because we have other guests for StreamYard.
How do I find the YouTube link?
I will send you the link. Yeah, it's on our website. So this is nice to tell everybody. Gente, os links para cada dia estão lá no nosso website do DELA. DELA.ufpr.br. A gente tem aqui nesse site. E aí tem lá a programação, e embaixo de cada dia tem o link para a transmissão direta no YouTube. Então, vocês podem entrar lá, clicar no link e entrar na transmissão direta lá pelo YouTube.
Ok.
Thank you very much, then.
Thank you.
Obrigada mais uma vez, professor. Foi um prazer conversar com o senhor. Muito obrigada.
So you see, we are doing the coloniality already.
We are. It's impossible for us not to use our, all the languages we know, all our repertoire.
We have been languaging decolonially for 3 hours.
Yes, isn't this great? It's a bit tiring, though. But it's great. Okay, well, bye-bye, everyone. See you tomorrow. Right. And thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.